Officially.
Alright, it is May 12th, 4:03. I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll go through roll call of planning commission members and then county commissioners. Joey Edwards.
Here.
Steve Stevens.
Here.
Dave Clark Farrell. Jason Rufo.
Here.
Ryan Hill.
Here.
David Yurch.
Here.
Alright, and county commissioners, Commissioner Tharp. Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Bullock.
Here.
Great. Changes or additions to the agenda?
We have nothing.
Okay, we have minutes to approve from April 28th. Everybody have a chance to review those, to have a motion to
Yes.
approve?
Yeah, I move to approve them.
Edward seconds.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. And updates from staff.
Thanks. I think we're gonna take a lot of our time today just to kind of go through our kind of work session topics. So we don't, I wanna just kind of be limited in our updates. Excited tonight to have the city joining us later this evening and do an introduction into the comprehensive plan process. So excited for that. I don't think that I have too much update wise. I'm gonna shift over to other members of the team. I wanna kind of hold a space for kind of backcountry discussion and some code amendment. So, Jason, do you have any?
I keep getting public comment from Box Creek,
Mhm.
so that has not really even slowed down, so.
So what we're still gathering information, Melissa's still gathering information on Box Creek. We do anticipate that we'll have some new information to introduce on the record and some possibility of opening up the public hearing again. We have been responding, thank you commissioners for sending us ongoing public comment. We are responding to that, providing them information on anything they have questions on, and also letting them know there may be an opportunity to reopen public comment coming up, and so we're providing them guidance on that. So I think that's thank you, Melissa, that's a good update just for everyone. So if you're receiving any information from any groups that have any interest, please bring that forward. I know that some of you have. Just bring that forward to the meeting, send it to staff, we'll respond. At this point, if you're receiving public comment, we can put it on the record and cure any potential for ex parte communication, as long as you don't kind of engage and discuss the nature of what people reaching out would like to talk about. So we're here to help you manage that piece. So if you're receiving any type of continued comment, please let us know, send it our direction, try to refrain from engagement on it, and we can always read it into the record and cure it as part of the public hearing process when we meet again. So just a reminder that we're here to support you if you're receiving any kind of feedback.
Who should we send that to?
Go ahead and send that to, forward it to Melissa.
Okay.
Melissa, have we gotten anything back from CDOT on the follow-up from the last meeting?
Yeah, we have, I've had one conversation and we're scheduling time to have a second conversation.
Have they thought about sending someone out here to look at it, the situation?
Well, I don't think it's a lack of awareness of the intersection that is the issue. But I can make sure that that's true.
Okay.
And we're also engaging with our engineering, we're looking to coordinate with Public Works and Kendall Bourne, so that we've got our own on the county side of the table, engineering taking a deeper dive into it too, so we can really help with those CDOT conversations. So those are upcoming as well.
Talking about the acceleration lane.
Kind of
I'm
time
talking
out
about
that we're
just the
taking to really dive
Whole 9
into.
yards, acceleration lane going north and
Gotcha.
Well, and we
safety
have to be
analysis.
careful because we can't really be discussing it here if we have not opened public comment, so we need to, if you have questions for staff, email staff. If you're receiving questions from public, make sure those get directed to staff. But we can't engage in a conversation here about it unless we are back into that.
I think the only other reminder I have is our planning commission, our next one is April 28th, which is a Wednesday. So
Very good.
May 28th, sorry. So just remember
For
that.
that file. Yep.
for Box Creek and for a backcountry site plan review.
So everybody can enjoy their Memorial Day weekend.
Okay, we're gonna jump into it. We've got, file 25-09, which is a Fiedler Scenic Conservation Overlay Site Plan Review. And I'll go ahead and read my opening statement. The Lake County Planning Commission will now conduct a public hearing. The statement I'm reading shall be incorporated into and made part of the record on these proceedings. The Planning Commission has jurisdiction to conduct a public hearing on site plan review under section 3.15 of the Lake County Land Development Code. The purpose of this hearing is to consider whether the proposed amendment should be approved. In considering that matter, the commission will address the approval criteria set forth in section 3.15.3E of the Lake County Land Development Code. The procedure this evening will be: 1, members of the commission will disclose any ex parte communications. 2, county staff will make initial presentation. 3, the applicant may then make their presentation. 4, after that, any persons either supporting or opposing the application may present evidence. 5, supporting and opposing witnesses may be questioned by the commission. Once questioning is concluded, no further questioning is permitted unless granted by the chair. And 6, the applicant may then present any rebuttal evidence. The parties and witnesses are asked not to submit redundant, irrelevant, or cumulative evidence. If someone has already made the point that you wish to make, please simply say so. The chair will also require that all comments be made to the planning commission and there be no dialogue between applicant and members of the audience. At the conclusion of the evidentiary portion of the hearing, the chair will entertain a motion to close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, and the commission will discuss and weigh the evidence. Then there will be a motion to close the public discussion phase of the joint public hearing, and the chair of the planning commission will entertain a motion on the application. The motion may take the form of one of the following recommendations. 1, approve the application with no conditions. 2, approve the application with recommended conditions. 3, approve the application with newly identified conditions. Or 4, deny the application. The planning director shall make a record of any substantial discussion on the motion and include that in the record with the decision of the committee, or the commission, I'm sorry. Are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the commission or to the form or substance of these proceedings? Okay, hearing none, I will now ask each planning commission member if you've had any ex parte communications to disclose, and if so, to please do so now. Joey Edwards.
None.
Steve Stevens.
None.
Jason Rufo.
None.
Ryan Hill.
None.
David Church.
None.
Heather Lind, none. Staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Lind. So this is a site plan review application for a solar energy system located within the Scenic Conservation Overlay. Just a bit about the location. The property address is 10011 South Highway 24. It is a 29-acre parcel that's zoned agricultural forestry, surrounded by U.S. Forest Service land and state trust land, and it's located just south of the Crystal Lakes recreation area. The property owners did get an approved site plan review in 2020. They constructed their single-family home in 2021, and now they are coming back for a site plan review for a solar energy system that will be roof mounted. And as you can see from these two pictures, the solar panels will be installed on the south-facing sections of the lower elevation roof sections. These arrows show it, and you can see it in this picture right there. So the solar energy system will consist of 25 individual panels from Q cells, and they're estimated to take up around 75% of that identified roof area, totaling 528 square feet. They won't exceed the roof line, and they are estimated to produce about 50% of the household electricity annually. And as you can see from these pictures, they are dark colored solar panels, and they will be installed on that gray roof. So you can see how the colors will kind of align. So this application is subject to a couple sections within our land development code. Of course, site plan review approval criteria, but in addition to that, the Scenic Conservation Overlay District standards and the solar energy system design standards. Overall, we do feel like the application adequately addresses all of these different standards. The comprehensive plan, there really, as the applicant pointed out, there really isn't a lot about solar energy systems within the comp plan, but this parcel is labeled as conservation development, and we do feel like a solar energy system is in line with that designation. The solar panels will not be visible to southbound traffic unless you're looking in your rearview mirror. And again, they do have a similar color to the roof, and they have a non-reflective and anti-glare coating. Roof mounted system again, so there's no additional development on the parcel. And yeah, overall, we do feel like this application is compliant with the SCO and solar energy system standards. So we are not suggesting any conditions of approval, and short presentation, but happy to take questions and let the applicant add anything that I missed.
Yeah, Jeff, do you wanna start with any follow-up?
Yeah, maybe just a couple things. I agree with everything in the staff report. Just to add on, so obviously from the north, you don't see it at all because they're south facing. From the south, you can see them from about a mile away at like the Weston Pass Road or sort of the bridge over the railroad. But then the road actually dips down and you can't see the roof line until you're about up to the XL substation. And at that point, the western half of the solar panels are already hidden by the rest of the building. So I think, just to add that I think even from the south, it's, you're either pretty far away or already almost coming past it by the time it's really visible from the highway. And as the staff report said, it's almost 1,000 feet, like from the highway at the closest point there as you're coming level with the house. Oh, maybe just emphasize, like, there's no additional ground mounted anything, this is all gonna be either on the roof or conduit right in to the interior where the power control stuff will be.
Any questions from the planning commission?
Seems appropriate.
Planning commissioners on Zoom, any questions?
None for me.
Do I have a motion to close public hearing?
I move to close public hearing.
Edward seconds.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And if we can, entertain a motion. I have a paper version.
I think I can read it. Edwards moves that the Lake County Planning Commission approve file number 25-09 Fiedler Scenic Conservation Overlay Site Plan Review for the installation of an accessory solar energy system located at 10011 South Highway 24, Leadville, Colorado, finding that the proposed site plan is in substantial conformance with the express purposes, intents, goals, and policies of the Lake County Comprehensive Plan and any ancillary county acknowledged or adopted documents pertaining to natural resource protection, affording affordable housing, infrastructure management, or any area-specific community plans. Number 2, the proposed site plan conforms to the requirements and provisions of this code. Number 3, the proposed site plan adequately addresses the submittal requirement items. Number 4, the proposed site plan is consistent with and in harmony with neighboring land uses and future intended land uses in the area. Number 5, the proposed site plan is substantially in compliance with the requirements of the provisions of section 6.15 design criteria, and further finds that the standards within sections 5.2.20 and 4.3.3c have been adequately met.
Great, can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Yeah, I'll just say that I think it fits really easily. I would have a hard time, even if you could see the solar panels from the road, saying no to some on a roof. I think it's an important piece to.
Incorporated right on the main building there.
Okay, I'm just gonna do roll call vote. Joey Edwards,
Yes.
Steve Stevens,
Yes.
Jason Ruvo,
Yes.
Ryan Hill,
Yes.
David
Yes.
Heatherland, yes. Okay. Great. Item number 2 on new business, yeah, thanks, good night. Backcountry structure standards work session.
And so tonight I like indulge staff in what we really wanted to do was just kind of revisit backcountry, recognizing that this is a relatively new discussion for some of our planning commission and board of county commissioners. These are the review of backcountry uses and site plan is either administrative or the planning commission makes decisions. But this zoning was created in 2002, or 2022, excuse me, after 10 years plus of very deliberate planning and engagement with the community, lots of town hall meetings. It was a process with a lot of ups and downs, and so it was very exciting when we finally got it over the finish line. But some of the things that led to it was a desire to create a very low density, low impact, conservation-minded zoning. Really encourage better use of lands in our rural outlying areas. Make sure that we were identifying maybe pre-existing conditions or mitigate hazards associated with wetlands or floodplain or maybe mining remnants on properties. And also we really wanted to minimize the footprint. That was the planning commission's goal really, was to establish kind of a new use. It was a real balance, so it tended to be a little bit of a down zoning, but at the same time, we introduced a use that had never historically been allowed with a backcountry structure. So the goals around that time, this is kind of duplicative of what I've just said, but it really was really mapping and identifying where are these environmentally sensitive areas, where are our rural remote areas. They had been delineated somewhere, to some extent through our comprehensive plan, but we got a lot more deliberate in the way that we mapped out these areas. And of course, we were looking to minimize development impact in these areas. It was the idea that we saw other communities getting behind too, and like, I don't wanna see mini mansions in the backcountry. About this time, we were seeing a huge uptick in building permits, and the thought of airlifting materials into sites started to be discussions that we were having in the planning department, the building department. There were properties that were spurring these conversations coming up above tree line, and it was really concerning. And so, we saw other communities around us that had felt these same pressures, and we really studied their model codes to get an idea of how to preserve while still being really intentional in how we wanted to see these lands used. And so this is just a quote from the newspaper that really kind of impressed upon everyone. This was happening in November of 2021. So taking you back in time to right before the adoption in 2022, we had seen a 300% increase in building permits between 2019 and 2020, and 2022, excuse me. 2015 to 2022, 300% increase in building permits. And we were starting to, the planning department, building department, were starting to get these, what we always thought would be just unconceivable ideas around building. Well, what will it take? How much money will we have to pump into this? And I'd really like to have one of those ledge pools so I can really take advantage of the vistas around here.
Next to the helipad.
Albeit that, yes, I have to figure out a way, to heat that, and that, seems like it could be doable with the right engineering and money. So those were the things that were really kind of driving us, as well as we had seen over, decades, these small non-compliant structures kind of popping up in the backcountry. People were wanting to put in yurts or small, kind of low impact, small footprints of, mining cabins or use in hunting cabins, things that had been in the backcountry, maybe historically, but they were illegally going up. And we were running after ourselves and had been for quite some time in trying to gain compliance in these outlying areas. So there was certainly a new trend and demand that we had always taken a compliance standpoint on. And we thought, well, what if we allowed a very minimal build in the backcountry? And we started to find a way that we managed these better. We were aware of them, and we did thoughtful stewardship in the planning of them to kind of mitigate and get in front of those man-made hazards. Also having better known conditions in the backcountry would also obviously aid us when we have very limited resources. So this shows you the mapping of, and this was our backcountry zoning district as we were going around and just trying to identify different areas. So all the bright green is Forest Service, the yellow is BLM. This is our east side mining area. Of course, we stayed completely out of there because we prohibit any type of residential use. And so you will see that our boundaries are these areas and the inholding. So much of this is a lot of public lands, but the blue indicate the private land parcels that were affected by this rezoning. So this kind of gives you an idea of kind of the amount of land holdings that were part of this rezone, and then just gives you a good oversight of the geographic areas that we rezoned into backcountry through this process. All construction within the backcountry now requires, as a prerequisite for any type of development, a site plan review. These are decided by planning commission. So you will see through this process, there's really 3 steps. There's one, determining what kind of septic system and what kind of use. That's a Board of Health decision and review. Then the planning commission looks at the site plan in this area. And then if all of those boxes check, then they can apply for their building permit or for the backcountry structure that we're gonna talk a little bit more about. But these are just some of the standards associated with that plan review. We're really looking at, like I said, creating that very low our degree of footprint and degree of disturbance. We address slopes. We have additional setback requirements from any types of water bodies or wetlands. We increased or created actually a trail setback. We talked about the aesthetics of the natural environment. We talked about really discouraging any type of fencing unless it was really needed, and then making sure that it's wild life friendly. We of course wanted to concentrate on dark sky compliance in these areas. There has to be a tree removal plan that we look at, and also in line with that at the same time, we require a fire mitigation plan that works and in conjunction with the Leadville Lake County Fire Rescue. So they have to review the plans and approve them as part of the site plan review process. And then of course, we look into these site conditions, with any type of existing hazards associated with the property, and can we avoid these areas as far as any type of future development, or what is the plan for mitigation of their naturally occurring. Also wanting to be very mindful of any type of habitat areas, or maybe we have endangered species in a certain area, so we want to be thoughtful and good stewards of those kind of conditions. Also, alpine tundra, also another area of great protection and care should be given if any type of development is even contemplated in this area. This also created a process then that we go out and do a very robust referral process with our public land partners, environmental health, fire department, public works, and any other identified stakeholders. So that can be a whole wealth of different agencies and departments that we work very closely with, but typically, as you saw from the mapping, these areas are almost always adjacent to, I think almost 100% adjacent to public lands. So we wanna make sure that we remain thoughtful in our approaches of any type of development in these areas. All of those agencies were really instrumental in helping us define boundaries and having a voice at the table. They were all part of our discussion in the creation of this zoning. Single family detached homes, this is one area that we became a little more restrictive. While we didn't limit any type of occupancy, they are still required, as any dwelling units are, to be built to the adopted IRC code at the time. However, we, instead of having a minimum square footage, which exists in our land development code, we created a maximum allowed. So this was one of the ways that we put in standards that were more restrictive, and that was limiting single-family homes in these areas to 1,100 square feet. Also, they of course have to go through planning commission review for the site plan to look at any existing conditions. And these are required to have a well and an engineered septic system, a full OWTS system. So those are the requirements, and just kind of the straight, one kind of more restrictive aspect to dwelling units in the backcountry. But backcountry structures, this was a new use that we created, and this is straight from the code. They are by definition a non-commercial, part-time occupied habitable structure. And the structure shall be less than a dwelling unit as specifically evidenced by the absence of a kitchen among other amenities, and not function as a primary residence. So the temporary occupancy is both defined within the septic regulations as well as our development code, and that is that they can't be occupied for more than 90 days consecutively and no more than 180 days a year. And this is an approval that they get for their septic system that goes of record on the property. So we wanted to make sure that as we created these new uses, the first owner may be very aware of the limitations of them, but for resale, we wanted to make sure in perpetuity we captured that these truly are not dwelling units. And so when a variance is granted for one of these structures, we record the permit on the record, which then trigger under the address for the parcel, so that it's always picked up on the title search, that these are temporarily occupied structures and not dwelling units. They require an alternative method of sanitary waste. They can be no larger than 600 square feet with a height no greater than 20 feet. They can have a loft. We don't, in the building definitions, we don't consider lofts to be a second story, they're a single story, but they can have a loft. They require just an administrative plan review, and of course have to go through the site plan with the planning commission. We require the applicant to bring in a resume of an inspector that will conduct site inspections. We don't have our building inspector go out and do the inspections as these were constructed and erected. And so we get a resume and we approve a third-party inspector that the applicant pays for in these more remote locations. And they are subject to our ordinance that's known as 9904, which means they have to be kept free and clear of any type of excessive trash, rubbish, unlicensed vehicles, those kind of things. We did see a tendency in some different areas through some compliance efforts that sometimes backcountry locations also can serve kind of as a secluded area, dumping area. And so we wanted to be very mindful that we address that has been something that's occurred in the past, and we wanna make sure and get in front of it with this newest adoption. So tonight, what I wanted to kind of bring up for you, give you a history on where we've been, and start talking about these backcountry structures as we're starting to put this code into purpose and we're starting to administer it. And that is that we very intentionally created a very unique use in the backcountry with these backcountry structures. They do not follow intentionally the building code. They follow zoning standards and we'll kind of go through them a little bit. Statutorily, we cannot exempt dwelling units from building codes. Once we've adopted a building code throughout a jurisdiction, we can't create exceptions from it. So this took a great deal of time with, I worked with building code experts and we put all our zoning brains together and we came up with a way to create standards that mimic some of the essential elements of building code, but they are zoning and not building. And so what that means is that we have to be very intentional as these backcountry structures come in, that we are keeping them simplistic, that we are keeping them this minimal footprint, and that they're not getting overly sophisticated within the amenities that they house or the services they provide. And what we're tending to start to see is an interest in kind of making the coolest backcountry structure that you can think of that could have kind of a whole array of amenities to them. And so we're gonna be very cautious to make sure that we're towing the line on things. Things like 100-gallon propane tanks in the backcountry are not what we ever wanted to see. A residential home has a standard size of about 500 gallons, but we've started to hear, well, maybe 100 gallons is a reasonable because we're in the backcountry. And so what I think that we were going for, and so my idea of the intent behind this is we want something that takes a couple, a few gallons, maybe a 5-gallon tank or a 2.5-gallon propane tank that you may have while you're at the property and then you remove it when you go, whether that be for a cooking stove or another appliance. But there was never a thought that we would create wiring inside of these structures, or would there be any trigger that they would need anything other than maybe a permit to put in a wood stove, and that we made sure that we had combustible proper area around this. So I'm just gonna go through the standards just real briefly, and then I'd love to pause, take any questions that you might have. And there's 2 that I've highlighted because I think they need just a little more work to be a little more specific. But the first 3 we've already talked about. The next 4 just kind of talks about the structural integrity. Structures shall be anchored in such a way as to avoid overturning. Walls, floors, and structural elements in contact with the ground shall not absorb or transmit moisture in an amount that can be detrimental to building elements. They'll have general stability and be designed and constructed to carry the expected loads to the ground. Heating stoves shall be installed to either manufactured specifications or maintain a 3-foot clearance from combustibles at a minimum. The reason that we said "or" is we thought, well, these are yurts, these are very small cabins. What if they buy something online that doesn't have, and they can't find the manufacturer's installation guide? We still wanna make sure that they've met combustibles and proper ventilation. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. No fuel-fired equipment except for removable cooking appliances having portable tanks shall be allowed. So this is the one that I think needs a little bit of wording, and that is, instead of no fuel-fired equipment, I think what we wanted meant, and I know I was thinking fuel gas code, I want to stay away from fuel gas code. But I think it would be more intentional if it read no gas-fired equipment except for removable cooking, and I think this should be amended to removable appliances. Having portable tanks shall be allowed. We're starting to see, particularly we just found out about an incinerating toilet that may have maybe a good alternative in the backcountry, as long as I think that there's not a permanent gas connection to it. We wanna minimize that fire risk in the backcountry. We don't necessarily want to have gas lines that could be punctured by ice falling off roofs or carbon monoxide leaks when nobody is there for long periods of time, those kind of things. So, and it could be argued that fuel-fired equipment are heating stoves. So I think number 7, heating stoves, perhaps we would wanna limit that to wood heating stoves or maybe heating stoves in general. But then I think that we want to say instead of no fuel-fired equipment, that perhaps a better application of the standard would be no gas-fired equipment. Except for, I think maybe equipment that can be, or canisters that can be removed. The thought was that we're not having full kitchens in these, we're not having full amenities in these. So these don't have to be present on the property at all times. So we really want to kind of pack out any hazards that we can when the structure is not in use. Next is that it will have a minimum of 1 front door and 1 operable window, with a 5 square foot opening for any separate sleeping room. So if it is more than 1 room, that there is adequate egress. Lofts will have to provide a type of access. Battery operated smoke alarms are required in the common areas. Again, we didn't talk about carbon monoxide detectors because we really did not, back at the time we were creating this, we really didn't think of any gas piping to be present within these structures. Interior foam plastics, drywall metal, or OSB plywood, they all have to be properly covered because if they were to ignite, they do give off a toxic gas. And that's supposed to be paper-backed insulation shall be similarly covered. So these are just, again, life safety issues. And then there's always kind of this caveat that we baked in that alternative methods may be proposed and reviewed by approval by the director. So I think the thing tonight, we just wanted to let you know that these uses it's the time of year you're gonna start getting some site plans. And right now we're working through, I think 2 or 3 more variances. One's already been approved and there's a site plan coming in the backcountry. So we just wanted to prepare you for what does it mean and why did we create the zoning and what are we being mindful of and the standards in the backcountry. And then just see if generally the planning commission and the board of county commissioners would agree that maybe being a little more explicit in these 2 particular standards might be beneficial. And recognize that off-the-grid appliances kind of are forever evolving. Did reach out to 10th Mountain to just kind of find out what kind of propane they use in the backcountry, and generally it's removable propane for heating or for cooking stoves. But there is some propane use. They don't use incinerating toilets, and the majority of heat is wood. So those are just kind of, we really investigated and looked at the 10th Mountain model as a good example of what we kind of want to structure these backcountry structures as. The other thing is, water sources can be ice melts, pack in, pack out, those kind of things as well. So take a pause, that was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, is there something that you can say, so what did you want the number 7 to change?
I think just identifying that 8 might just, there might be a little bit of a perceived conflict, because first we say heating stoves, and then later on we say no fuel fired equipment. So, someone brought it to my attention that they felt, well, heating stoves are fuel fired, they're wood fuel.
Well, do you
So-
wanna change that specifically to wood fired?
Yeah, I
Well, I
think,
guess I'm
so.
wondering if 7 can stay if 8 changes to gas.
and that was kind of the thought, is that we change 7 to heating, and then 8 more intentionally says no gas fired equipment. And I'm not sure that we wanna limit it to just cooking appliances, because we have discovered there is this incinerating toilet, which is a really great way to manage solids, and have them completely removed off-site. So they are putting in a gray water system for a single sink, but the incinerating toilet is taking care of all of the solid material.
What
So-
about limiting propane tank storage sizes? I mean, a 20-gallon or a 20-pound propane tank is standard size, still relatively mobile, but anything larger than that becomes really non-mobile. That's the kind of thing you typically that too heavy for one person to put up on their truck and take out, so they're trying to get a truck up there to do that, which I think is what you're trying to avoid.
Right.
Now, a 5-pound is tiny, the kind you find on a little tiny RV. But 20-pound would seem reasonable. You'd still something you could move in and out by hand. You could do multiples without having a problem. Maybe limiting it by size to something super standard like that. Can be refilled locally in any number of places.
Right.
I guess I'm wondering if we need to say no fuel fired, no gas fired equipment, except for equipment using portable gas tanks that will be removed when not occupied, like, because we have nothing that says they have to take these propane tanks, so they could have 70 little
Well, no,
1-gallon things
absolutely.
there, and so we have nothing that says you are agreeing to take them out, like that's what our code says. So I guess I'm wondering if number 8 actually gets reworded to, like, we, rather than deciding how big it can be, it's all gas tanks to be like second sentence of that, all gas tanks will be removed from property when not in use.
What
I
about
might
oil
also
burners?
consider getting rid of the word appliances.
Yeah, I
Because
think you just
you
stick
seem
with that.
very specifically, you're talking about stoves, like portable stoves that could be removed. And an appliance can be I mean, you can get a 24-inch propane oven and cooktop, you can get a propane refrigerator. Appliances opens you up to a much broader array of
Well, I
what
think we
somebody's
want
thinking.
that, right? So I think if you say no fuel fired equipment except for equipment having portable tanks, of which the portable tanks have to be removed when the structure is not in use.
I guess that's where I'd be careful, because I have a place like this, and I have a propane tank, and you could do it with a 20-pound propane tank, it doesn't have to be a big one. That plumbs your stove and plumbs your refrigerator, and you can have a full little usable kitchen using propane. But you seem to be, you want the fuel and also the appliances to be removable. I'm assuming, if I'm understanding right,
I think for life safety, I think in the thought of this, I think it's removing the fuel source.
Okay.
To moreover, the code specifically said that, you're not gonna build a kitchen in your plant. You're not going, because we're not gonna have any indoor plumbing, we're not gonna have any, any of those type of, infrastructure within the structure itself. But, I think that the point of the standard is to remove the threat, within
so
this area.
specifically removing the fuel.
So I think,
Limiting the size of the fuel storage makes that possible.
Because like you said, the incinerator, you want number 8 to apply to things like that, and that's not removable. So I think we get rid of removable cooking appliances and just replace that with equipment as you've referenced before. But then saying that fuel has to be removed from the property when the structure's not in use.
Yeah, portable tanks not to be larger than, something along those lines. Because it's not just gonna be, people won't look at that only thinking about propane, they'll also be thinking about gasoline for the generator, or diesel for their generator. 5 gallons are gonna be comparable to a 20-pound propane tank. All of those things are highly movable and removable.
Yeah, so you could
Anything
do a whole
larger.
nother line item of any fuel, no fuel will be stored on the property, or portable tanks will be removed.
So maybe those container sizes are the way you wanna do that.
so I think, what I'm hearing, and what I think would be really helpful, this is great input. Removing any, fuel sources, containers, whether it be diesel, gasoline, propane, whatever that is, removing them out of, offsite when, not in use. And then, so there's no permanent gas on site. and then, that you're also removing, I'm sorry, I just lost the second thing. But
Was heating stove gonna go to wood burning stove or no?
and I do think, what do you all think? I don't know of,
There are propane wall heaters that people will install in a small cabin like
Yeah,
that to
I
use.
think you leave it because you want them installed to manufactured, yeah, I
You
mean,
do, absolutely.
I think you just leave that heating stoves and the fuel fired is where you have the conflict, so if you change that and then the fuel sources have to be removed, then I don't think you have to get into the sizes, because if the rule is you have to take them away, then it's pretty obvious you're not installing a 500-gallon propane tank. You know, you don't have to get involved in sizes, because,
I did have someone suggest that they thought something, temporary is 100 gallons, and that they could bring it in and out, seasonally, I think. was
100
the-
gallons weighs about 400 pounds. It is not a movable item once it's in place. I don't
Well, and I
care how
think
much
it's like-
somebody says that it is.
yeah.
It's also a bomb.
Right, absolutely. And so I do think, and just in some of these locations, trying to get propane delivery into these sites, you know, is
No.
dangerous
Could be very
unto
destructive.
itself.
Portable tanks.
Okay, so we will highlight them as
Well, and-
portable, and I think we can wordsmith on,
Size of the-
size of that.
I still
not
might
to
be a little
exceed
careful there
20.
because you can go to Big R and buy a 50-pound. That's still that's an awfully big tank. And it's really truly not. I can move it if I wanted to, but it's a lot of work. But 20-pound tanks are easily sourced, easily refilled. You can have
But you have to
multiples of
remember,
them.
somebody could have 10 of those,
Well-
then you're at the
well, but-
same, you have the same risk.
You could, but 10 of those are truly removable, where
Yeah.
2 50 pounds are truly not removable. So I'd much rather have 4 20-pound tanks than somebody out there with a 100-pound tank that I know isn't gonna get moved.
So we wanted to make sure that they're removable and offsite when the property's not being occupied. That's also a pretty easy code enforcement practice too, for us to be able to enforce. So if we're visiting one of these sites, we take a complaint that there's excessive rubbish, or there's all of these used or canisters around outside, that's an easy enforcement for us as well. So if we can just get them offsite when nobody's there, you know, the same kind of just pack in, pack out kind of idea. That's really what these were meant to do, and to alleviate as much hazard potential as possible. So we will amend those, and just because these are an administrative review, it was just a really great time to kind of check in. I agree, we're gonna wordsmith those, get them, but this gives us, I think, also a stronger confidence in just going through the administrative process on the ones that are pending while we work on the code amendment. But it'll be very basic. And to that, my last item,
Now you
I'm gonna
don't,
time check, 9 minutes.
in those, we just very quickly,
Yes.
in the last one, none of those mention any kind of solar or any kind of limitations on solar.
So solar is, that's a good comment, and lead in. Solar is something that has been a little misconstrued in, structures. We incentivize solar in the backcountry for single family homes. But unless they can come up with a low voltage system, that, and then we're still kind of working with the state on what that means, since we don't permit, don't do electrical permits. We really want to minimize solar as well. We'd love to see it for single family homes in the backcountry, but again, that saying, we don't want anything basically electrified while nobody's there that could have the potential for some kind of,
Yeah, get another portable system, like,
Yeah.
I would imagine people are using portable solar for those kind of things.
that would be fantastic.
Right.
We really just don't want it, we wanna stay away from anything that's
Yeah.
required.
Totally.
Sounds good.
So that's good, and so then the last item, we're kind of trying to minimize any type of code amendment actions until we get through our comprehensive planning. And but one other item that we think might need to be done sooner than that later, and that's making an accessory dwelling units an administrative review versus a conditional use permit. And so it would, the administrative review would still look at adequate utilities, parking, still require single ownership, and STRs will only be allowed in primary licensing. So again, they're not eligible, ADUs will never be eligible under our current code for secondary licenses, correct? So we would still make sure that all of those standards are being met, but it takes it away from being a more onerous process at this time that we're really trying to incentivize housing. So we'd already added additional accessory use within the backcountry, or within the business zoning, sorry. So we strengthened that for our housing goals, but this again just makes that a little more attainable and less process.
Yes.
So that's all we have, and then we're gonna stop our planning review and move into,
Nobody had a concern about that,
No, amen, it should have just, it should just be that way.
I have a question about backcountry. I thought I
I
saw
didn't
your
see
hand
anything
up.
about fire extinguishers, is that something you considered?
having them present in the home.
Yeah, they're in there. It's
They
just
are
not
there?
on that list.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Awesome, we just have a few more minutes before city planning comes in double.
Would you like a break before we start?
Yeah, we'll do a 5-minute break and come back 1 minute before 5. That would be 4:59.
There you go.
I just put it back on the wall.
Okay, we will go ahead and call our meeting back to order and we'll pass the floor over to city planning and zoning so they can call their meeting to order.
Okay, calling the meeting, the city of Leadville Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order at 5:01. Could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Green.
Here.
Chair Buller.
Here.
Commissioner Bauer. Commissioner Ducharme. Commissioner Law. Commissioner Janus. Commissioner Lobby.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, I mean, I guess at this point, we're just gonna hand the floor over to Ann.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank
To,
you, city and county, planning commission and board of county commissioners are here this evening as well. For this opportunity to, have a presentation this evening with our partner on our One Community project, Clark Anderson is here from Community Builders. And, I think we just got him on a Wi-Fi connection here. And we do have an agenda for this evening as well. So we've got both materials out the ready for you, Clark, whenever you would like. Yeah, do you wanna come sit up here at the,
We could move.
oh, that's Deep Church.
I can move.
Or I can move as well.
We could move David.
Wherever's easy.
Let's move you up to the,
Just moving.
I just kinda sit over here.
Clark, sit right here.
Oh, there we go.
Deck chairs.
Take my space.
Yeah, I don't need it.
Oh, here's
Reach
Sissy,
out.
well, here, I'll put Sissy right here.
Yeah.
Isn't this fun?
And then you guys should have, I shared the slides, so you guys should have
We will get
access to
up
that.
and go in here. In just a minute.
And I apologize that, so Brooke, our fearless leader on this project, is not feeling well and couldn't make it today. She asked me instead. I was coming anyway, but with Brooke being gone, I'm gonna do more than I was going to, and it's unfortunate for you guys because Brooke would have been awesome, but she is, I think, on the phone, and I think, maybe.
She is online.
She's online, okay, great.
I'm here. Yeah. I'm so bummed and disappointed I couldn't be there with y'all tonight, but you're in Clark's expert hands.
You're only a little expert. Alright, great. Well, why don't we, oh shucks, it's okay. Why don't we go through and do, we can look at the agenda. And then we can try to come back to that.
Brooke, do you have the PowerPoint too, if we
Yeah, Brooke
share?
could share
Can
it.
you share it?
Yeah. Yeah, I can share it on our end.
Okay,
Awesome.
perfect,
Do
that'll
that.
make it easier.
Yeah, for sure. Let me go ahead and pull that up.
And then while she's doing that, if you wanna go to the agenda, we just talk about what the plan is for tonight.
She's pulling up the agenda or the presentation?
She'll pull up the presentation and
Got
we
it.
go back to that thing you had up, just so we can walk everybody through that. Thanks. Where did it go?
I might post out of that one.
Doing a great job as always.
Yeah,
Sorry.
performative screen sharing is
Oh,
always
man,
so
there you go.
stressful.
Yeah, sorry.
Good job, Susan.
So,
Yay.
yeah, don't worry, we planned it in, so.
It's hard to be under pressure too,
I know, that's the hardest part.
So the main things we're wanting to do is just, with a project like this, taking on an integrated, comprehensive plan is unique. It's not, never been done, but it's definitely unique, especially in smaller towns and more rural parts of the state. And so, what we're wanting to do is start getting ahead with you all as planning and zoning commissioners. Each with your respective jurisdictions, you have this important role of, holding this space for how we, where are we going? Planning part of the work, and we're really excited by what you guys are doing and by the opportunity to do this in an integrated and aligned way. And now that we've got the project rolling sufficiently, it's nice to sort of take a step back and say, okay, where are we trying to get to with this? So that's really what the point of tonight's meeting is to help you guys get aligned around what we want out of the ultimate plan that we're gonna create. And then actually starting to think about the product itself. So in a way, it's what's the work you guys want the final product and the process to do for us. We've talked more about the process, so I think in a lot of ways it's more the plan itself as a tool. What do you guys want it to do for you, right? And what are the most important priorities in that? And then also, with that in mind, how do we wanna think about literally the content, the structure, because there's a lot of different ways to do these plans. And I think you guys have done some homework maybe, is that right, Brooke, sort of looking at, or you've maybe sent some different examples of different type of comprehensive plans for folks to look at, is that right?
Yeah, so I shared out some plans that the project management team found most useful or most valuable, and just some examples of the different ways that the plan content itself can be structured just to get us, you know, in the right frame of mind today.
Awesome. So I think now you can probably get us going on, if you wanna share your screen and start working through the slides, Brooke, that's awesome.
I have a question. So in the visioning process, did you hear anything that surprised you? Was it pretty much?
Have we heard anything that surprised us so far, Brooke, is the question.
That's a big question.
I'm gonna say, that's probably my hunch, and Brooke's heard a lot more than I have. Probably nothing where we're like, never heard that before. But that said, what we are learning definitely is very specific to this place. So it's not, I don't wanna come across as like, we've heard it all before, and in fact, we could have just done this thing for you without hearing from people, we're just going through, like, that's not the case. We're doing another visioning project of a similar scale in a different place, and I can tell you, like, the values are different, and a lot of the sort of, the concerns people have is different, and how they understand the concerns and like their sort of shared kind of cultural community narrative about what they're going through is different than yours, so.
I'm sure there'll be a spectrum of
Yep,
responses, so.
Brooke, is there anything that's been surprising for you or the rest of the team in going through the data?
Yeah, really parroting the sentiment, Clark, nothing surprising or shocking. It's been really interesting to understand and get our arms around the unique flavor of the values in this community. As Clark was saying, like, we just went through this similar process and West End, Colorado, and like they also had values, right, that are related to outdoor access and nature. But it's much more from like a utility and agrarian background there versus here it was something, a little bit that spoke to the intrinsic value of nature. So the flavors and the nuance are really different, and I would say nothing really shocking came out of it. But it was a really, fascinating process. We're talking with the engagement team tomorrow night, workshopping our values, and then we'll be releasing them to the community. And so that's really, I think, the next interesting part is like seeing, how close we are to like getting it right and what needs a little bit more refinement, what did we miss? So that's where the values are right now, but I think we're in a really strong place.
Great. So we'll just dive in here, we got a lot to cover, and one of the things I'll say is we're hoping that this is sort of the first in a series of conversations that we can have with these two bodies together, because again, if you guys are in the work of creating a shared, integrated, comprehensive plan, we're really gonna wanna sort of spend the time not only thinking about today, it's starting with the basics. It's like we're all gonna go out to dinner together and we're like, what restaurant do we wanna go to, right? And then we're gonna also, at some point, wanna talk about like, how are we actually gonna work together? And what is it gonna look like as a sort of how we structure our collaboration to be effective? Because part of the intent and the goal that you guys have is to be really effective in the coordination and collaboration that you can have as local governments and the various entities inside of them that need to work together for these things to go well. So just take this as the point of that is like, this is the start of some conversations, we hope, not just a one-time deal. Anything else on getting started?
No, I think, just super excited, I think it'll be really, this is like new territory and new opportunity for us to all be in the same room, doing this together, with a unified approach, so, really exciting, looking forward to just kind of understanding what's gonna be the best approach for working together and how that's going to get cohesive and so really excited to just be at this new period of time of working together, such a amazing opportunity. I'm just excited.
I would say, while this document will get adopted by the respective elected officials for each government, the statutorily, each commission is charged with comprehensive planning. So this is really the work happens heavy here, and your BOCC and the city council will depend heavily upon that.
Great. So the first thing we want to talk about, and for some of you guys, this will feel like we may be retreading ground that we've been down, and I think it'll be valuable in the sense that even though we're in certain respects, sort of there might be overlap with things we've talked about, that's just because just because there's overlap, not because we're actually having the same conversation. Because in the past, we've talked about, what do we want this process and this whole effort to do? And now we're gonna come back and ask the same thing, but more again, thinking about you guys as the eventual owners of this tool that we're all designing together. We wanna start by just saying, like, what do you guys want? What do you want it to do for you? You're designing the tool. More or less there's some things it needs to do. And we'll talk about those things. But what do you want it to provide, as far as if you can just stay on the first one first. What do you guys want it to provide just in terms of, as a tool? And we have some things that we'll come to in a second.
Well, I would say, I'll start. I feel like creating a plan that's easily digestible amongst the entire community, but then shows more unity and uniformity between the two jurisdictions, but also highlights how there's differences. I think we're such a small community, and it's always been a battle to deal with, where's that city line, and where, nobody really even knows unless they're involved in these processes, I think, sometimes, where that city line is and county starts. So I think creating a plan that helps, really show that community vision and outline it a little bit more specifically than we've done in the past, but in a much more digestible way for the general community to be able to see and understand and hopefully agree with.
Do we have anything that wants to build on that?
I think it needs to address the changing, circumstances of the growth.
Say more about that.
Well, historically, this was a mining community, and it's been through now tourism development and growth and then the mining has come back. So I think it has to cover a lot of different bases. It's not just a simple small town, I think.
Agreed.
I think it should focus on preservation, stewardship of the land. I think that county's kind of a unique county, unique area, and I think it needs to focus on preservation, stewardship.
And you said in the land? Other thoughts in terms of the work you guys want this to do for you as we design the tool? We'll get into in a second. The next slide shows some kind of common elements of comprehensive plans, but rather than sort of start there where we sort of our minds work into the structure that's there, we wanna sort of start a little more wide open, so.
I think when we are doing development application review or conditional use permits, there's this like conformance with I don't know what the exact wording is, but like conformance with the comprehensive plan, and I feel like, and this happens a lot of places I work too, it's like the applicants are like cherry picking whatever's gonna
half sentences from.
Yeah, whatever's gonna like defend their application, and I know this is like one of those problems that's impossible, but have a clearer tie-in so that when us as relative commission bodies are like reviewing applications, it's pretty clear of like what the criteria are that we're trying to measure it against. And also for the applicant, when they're reading the plan in order to develop their application, it's a little more clear what the vision for the overall future of the community is, and also in the specific location of where they're proposing something, that it's clear of what the city and the county kind of envision for that area, and whether that's through, you know, really strong 3-mile plan and talking about annexation policy, or we've talked about for years in vague terms at the city, like gateway planning, kind of the northern gateway and southern gateway, and having like a clear vision and standards about what we want those gateways to look like. I mean, that's where a lot of the growth is gonna occur. It's like in the 3-mile, in the gateway areas. So having like really strong vision for those elements.
Let's put a pin in that one.
Sorry, that was like 8 things.
No, that's excellent. This is where you guys are doing just fine. Let's put a pin in that one, in fact, because I think we'll wanna come back to this question of, in fact, the last 2 comments in a way speak to types of areas, right? And you're on the city TNZ, right? County, right? Perfect, you guys each wore your hats. So, you know, you're sort of talking about different parts of town, almost different districts, right? Like, here's some neighborhoods, places where is the city changing? You're talking about like the broad swath of the county and like what's really important for you guys to be thinking about. And so it's nice, so good, we'll come back to that and then like, these are perfect answers for now, but also I wanna go a little deeper there.
I wanted to say something, you know,
Yeah.
When we did this in 2015, you know, when we did our comprehensive plan, we did them laterally, but we didn't do them collaboratively. And so my thought is, this may give us an opportunity to more closely align the city and county planning around the comprehensive plan, so that we don't have people playing off of each other. We don't see a lot of that, but if the city and county had the same set of rules, basically, and I don't know how we get there, that would clear up a lot of unclarity among people in the city and county.
Yeah, and almost it's sort of like, the rules are gonna be different for different contexts, county, you know, city, but if we're playing by the same rules that are responsive to those things, right? And there's clarity and uniformity around what the sort of the structure of the rules are maybe.
I'm just not sure how we get there.
Yeah, well, that's what we'll get to, right?
Yeah, and the collaboration piece of this, like, not only creates a base where we could be more aligned on those kind of regulations where we should be aligned, but it also, I feel like the thing we lacked in 2015 was the ability to say, you know, this kind of use would thrive way better in the city limits versus the county, or vice versa, right? Like, do you guys need welding shops in the city limits right now? Do you need, you know, or should those be directed towards, like, do we offer that incentive to happen in the county at the industrial park? You know, like, so I just think there are things like that we weren't able to really collaborate on before, that this gives us the opportunity to do that, in a way of saying, hey, you know, we see the vision of these type of industrial uses belonging here, we, you know, in giving us that basis to make decisions that align with the comprehensive plan much easier.
I think it's really that kind of intergovernmental coordination piece. So, and maybe even possibilities of increasing efficiencies between jurisdictions, really having that policy foundation, like Gabby talked about, but also driving, I mean, we're all, between the 2 different city and the county, we're also working on a variety of other plans. And so really just being able to have that policy foundation that's really speaking to all the other plans that are in development or will be in future development. And then I know a real benefit will be kind of that capital improvement plan. You know, what the priorities are and really understand that long range prioritization of those projects.
Clark, I would say from a staff perspective, so staff is using this document pretty heavily. I would say, two key words would be prioritization, because that's something that staff really, encounters regularly, whether it's at the commission level, it's at the elected level, it's with the public, it's with applicants, shifting priorities, and those change, month to month, year to year. So, not to say that you would expect those priorities remain the same, 10 years from now, but that's the idea of the comp plan, I think, is that it needs to include some prioritization for staff, and then it also needs, I think one of the concerns that the critics have with comp plans is that, they sit on the shelf and they're a document that is not used. So I think that part of this plan, there needs to be a plan for how we track this, how we hold everyone involved accountable. So that's not just the traditional, hard copy that goes on the shelf with PDF that lives on the city website, but if there's a way to check in on this plan and see how it's used every year, what things are getting done. That goes a long way to interface with the public and who are trying to engage heavily to stay involved with this, not just the creation of the document, but also, through the years that we're using this document.
And hopefully the way that we've created the community values to create the vision, they're gonna have that buy-in. And so between having the buy-in behind that's really helping make those decisions, also having those measurable and being very clear in who and how, I think also helps with implementation.
I feel like with these type of roadmap documents that sort of show us how to get to these places in the future where we're thinking about growth and expanding and new shiny toys almost. And how do we collaborate to get there? I sometimes feel like one subject that gets left behind is repairing the past. Like all the stuff we've neglected that we're gonna need to be operating in tip-top shape if we're gonna experience any more growth. Things like our sanitation, our drainage, our streets, our sidewalks, and how can the city and county work together to address these issues? So without that, we're not, this growth of these, additional people and cars is gonna be pretty taxing on the mess we've inherited. I feel like hasn't been addressed in the last handful of decades very well.
Yeah, well, you guys aren't alone in that, just so y'all know, the American development model is kind of like a Ponzi scheme. So we sort of like build the next increment growth with the sort of money we got from the last one, and we just keep doing that and we keep learning like that. But it's true that these are the moments when we can look at, okay, we can try to go and, like, what are the things we can fix that are high leverage for making it possible to do the things we want and try to catch up. I only bring that up because I'm in multiple different projects right now where we keep coming face to face with this sort of reality of the broken fiscal reality of just all these communities that are sort of have these, they're growing, they're feeling all this pressure, and they're all about to hit this sort of step change to need to make pretty big investments for the next increment of growth, and yet a lot of the growth they need to do is to make it so that the sort of normal folks can keep living there. And they're like, well, how do we shoulder them with, so it's a really interesting dynamic. I don't need to go on a sidetrack, but my point is, don't feel bad, you guys aren't alone. It's not like you like, everybody else was doing it great, you guys messed up.
So one other piece that I guess I would tail off of what Andrew just said is the infrastructure piece is unique here, obviously, with Leadville Sanitation and Parkville Water being private entities. And at some point, I would love for them to be at this table with us, collaborating as well, because I think that one big obstacle that we consistently have in this community is initially cities working on their own roads, counties working on their own roads, could potentially go after funding for both, could potentially start working together. But then before you do that, there really should be a new sewer line put in, so it's just like the collaboration in not having that very well with the current infrastructure, whether it be Excel or Parkville or Leadville C, and like, I think those are three big players that, hinder our ability to plan and develop responsibly and well, and it's causing, you know, like, we can have all the hopes and dreams we want in our comp plan of housing and all these things, but if those guys aren't at the table collaborating with us on how that's gonna happen, I mean,
Then we end up duplicating services and costing twice as much.
well, it just doesn't
Tear up
happen
the
because
road
of that,
and just
right?
pave, right.
It just doesn't
That's
happen,
what happens.
Yeah.
so.
And I
That's
will
an excellent point.
mention that's something that was in our last comprehensive plan as a goal. But again, we didn't necessarily have those measurable, built-in moments to make, the goals or the, accountable. So, it is something that we've been realizing for a period of time, and we did raise it up in the last iteration. So really good now to, like, how do we make it effective to do that coordination piece.
Great.
Yeah, can I just have one more thought adding on to this? That I think there's also kind of a cultural element to all of that, where like the infrastructure stuff with the roads and the sewer and the water lines and Excel the last couple of years has been extremely visible in people's neighborhoods, roads being closed off every other block last summer with no sense of which road is gonna be closed off. And I think it's honestly that, between that and some of the demographic and price shifts has really created a lot of distrust, and I'm sure I saw it in the engagement myself. I've seen it in other projects, but there's just like, I don't think we can accomplish anything until there's like a little bit of repair, not like the infrastructure repair, but like the community repair.
That relationship repair.
Relationship repair, cause there's some people that just don't think, oh, the county's trying to do too many things, we're never gonna do anything.
They paved a
Cities-
road and now it just got torn up by
Yeah, like you hear
sidewalks.
that stuff all the time, and I just feel like there's like a cultural community repair that needs to happen along with like physical.
And that goes to that last point of bringing these entities to the same table.
Yeah, and I guess more so during this process than after. Like, I don't even know that we want it as an action item for after, I think we want it as a action item for this process. Like, once we're kind of fine tuning, maybe later on, we're fine tuning kind of some of this data that we're putting into a comprehensive plan, it's like, hey, we wanna have a utilities meeting or infrastructure or whatever, and present to them, here's what the community shows, and here's our values, and here's what we see the growth to be, and where do you fit in, and how are we fitting that in? And I just think that those conversations with those boards should happen before we finalize the comp plan rather than after.
And there are other organizations trying to have that same conversation with those same entities now. So bringing those on board, Tony at the Streets at the city is trying to have a monthly meeting with all three. I'm sure the same thing with Road and Bridge, with Mike, so, yeah, we need to engage those guys at the same time.
So this is great stuff, and on that last point, it feels like there's two elements there. One is sort of in the process, what we can do to just get the conversation going. And then there's a secondary element that is maybe from the, your point, like we had some of these goals in there and we didn't accomplish them, which again, don't worry, so that is normal. So one of the things that we can think about there is, as a part of the plan itself, how do we create some structure for meaningful ongoing collaboration that isn't just what often happens there, sort of our spinning our wheels but doing it together now, So really figuring out how to try to make that productive and backed up with some systems and structures so you can collaborate effectively.
Yeah, is there a way to make that a process rather than a one-off every time?
Exactly,
We wanna get together.
and something that has some staying power. And it takes some commitment and investment, but once you put a little bit of foundation behind it, that can stick with you for a long time. So, great. Well, let's go to the next slide, Brooke. So sticking with this conversation for a minute, as we look at these are some things that you guys have spoken to, some of them. And is there anything when you look in here at some of the core elements that, I think we can anticipate and from past conversations we already know you guys are gonna wanna have that informs or maybe adds to what we just talked about? So as we look at this, is there anything you would add? Or connections you wanna make from the conversation we just had?
Where would like economic development, would that go in the policies section or?
Maybe in multiple, I mean, you
Okay.
guys, yeah, I think if you guys want a clear vision for how you wanna, the type of economy you want, some of it's there. And then potentially there's land use components to that, I mean, it might be in a lot, so I think,
Yeah,
but
okay.
that's good for us to
Investments
capture
policy.
that,
Yeah,
like, that's a top issue, probably.
Maybe diversification is high on everyone's list, whether across, you think it's across jurisdiction lines, across something.
Yeah. So that's good. Cool, and we'll come at this in a different slice in just a second, because actually that is, we're gonna shift into a conversation around some of the specific topics you guys might wanna like really emphasize. Cause as you know, there's probably any number of things we could dig into. So like what are feel, again, prioritization, what feel right now like they're the most important. We're gonna let the process play out, the community might have some ideas that inform that too, but it's important for you guys to get a sense of what you think are gonna be important topics, and then we'll also talk about areas. So just kind of connecting some dots here, I think it's good, you know, the infrastructure conversations I think fit nicely in there, and as does the intergovernmental coordination and the conversations we've just having about, you know, how do we implement and make sure we keep these things going. So nice job, Brooke, maybe we should have gone to this one first, but this way at least we sort of I think pulled in some of the areas between them, which is great. Cool, anything else before we move on to the next sort of part of the discussion, which is thinking about, all right, if that's sort of what we want, the work we want the plan to do, how do we think about some of the more specific components and content and structure? You moving there? Okay. Cool.
And maybe we can hit, we don't have to stay on this one, I think we had a pretty good conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
ahead, Brooke.
where we talked about some of these were just points that came up from previous conversations that we had with both commissions during the groundwork phase, and you know, we covered them all today again too. Prioritization, collaboration, and structures for sustaining that between two separate now planning departments. There wasn't a planning department at the city during the last process. Annexation came up. Oop. And then another piece that came out of our last conversation was historic preservation. But I think from here we can just move right back into our discussion questions.
Great.
Sounds like, and from a framework perspective, you know, the tool that what we presented before seems pretty robust. Here in this part of the conversation, I think Clark and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, thinking through, and maybe, you know, our first leading question would be the issues and the areas that can be both physical or topical, where we see, you know, that's a real priority for us, either for alignment or for creating shared direction.
And to keep it simple, let's start first on the issue front, and then we'll go to areas. So like areas being like locations. And again, we wanna just try to start getting more and more specific. So as an issue, you know, we talked about economic development and economic diversification. So building on that side of it, and we brought up, you know, stewardship, preservation, other things sort of topically, when you think about the most important challenges and opportunities you guys are facing, you're like, you know, what are the, I wanna make sure, here's another way to think about it. You're envisioning the table of contents and you're in the sort of that meaty section where we're getting into the different, you know, elements or chapters. You know, what do you really wanna make sure there's a chapter on?
Something that gets repeated over and over again, just in what we've covered so far, is this shared collaboration model. In 2015, obviously, there was a plan for the city and there was a plan for the county. They were supposed to work together, but there was very little collaboration done there. The city right now highlights collaboration with the county. We are one small city and we're one very small county, and all of our departments, our road and bridge and streets department overlap. Our police department and sheriff's department overlap. Our economic development absolutely overlaps at every point, at every turn. So having that highlighted throughout the plan about city and county collaboration and shared support seems to be very, very important, and something that should be kept front of mind in almost all of these plans.
I think housing is a big area, shared.
So what I always feel like, and Gabby kind of touched on this earlier, is an issue with the comprehensive plan is the
Cherry picking.
the conflict. So we need land stewardship. So we want there to be less development on a whole bunch of land, but then we need housing, which we need really high density on housing, right? And so there's these conflicts, and so you can be on either side of a discussion on a subdivision or a development and be able to pull something from the comprehensive plan that supports what you're saying, and there's not anything in there that prioritizes one over the other. And I find the same thing true with historic preservation. So you have this need for affordability, we need to have everything affordable, but now we're making it harder if you need to meet historic preservation standards. So there's these conflicting sections, and to me, that's the big one for me that I think is really hard to wrap my head around as far as how we are going to be able to make sure that each of those sections kind of addresses the conflict it may have with another section of the comprehensive plan, because there's just it's very, we have a big subdivision with big lots and sprawling, so it's not all super high density, which sounds beautiful until you realize, well, the only people who are affording those are $7 million home buyers, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, absolutely not. So it's one of those, how are we able to make sure that we can build a code off of our comprehensive plan that supports what we actually are meaning to identify in that comp plan. And it's just so easy to pretty much do that with anything, economic development, we need certain kinds of economic development, we need people to be able to work here and not have to work out of the county, but do we need crazy economic development that just brings tons of more tourism to town? I don't know, there's gonna be different opinions on that, so it's just there's just constant this to me happening in almost every section of the comprehensive plan.
I would say,
I have a
to
hard
what you're saying, it occurs to me, when we talked about collaboration between different planning and zoning commissions, having a collaborative effort on zoning could take care of a lot of that, where we agree on, okay, where should housing be built and where should it not be built? And, so zoning could be important in that, and also, I almost hate to go into the quagmire of table of uses, but that by definitions around table of uses, if those were consistent, it would make a big difference in terms of the perception.
That would be pretty cool to have, we see so many. First time Brooke and I got to work together on a big project was helping Gunnison County and Gunnison City and Crested Butte all try to get on the same page around some of these things, just around the sort of 3 mile planning area dynamics. It's a lot harder when you've all already got your plans, so, cause suddenly you're fighting for your plan as opposed to, so, yeah, those would be great things. I think Ryan has a hand.
Yeah, I don't think this is necessarily for you guys, but more for the county and the city folk in the room. What is different about this plan or now versus 2015 of the city and county working together? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, what is the accountability to stick to that plan? If there are, even as an example, there's new people that come in.
Well, the difference between 2015 and now, as far as, there was a little bit of collaboration, but it was done how a lot of comprehensive plans are, and we are not doing it that way this time, which I'm psyched about, but it was a consulting firm that was hired to work with both the city and the county simultaneously. So there were multiple town halls, but not nearly like what's happening now, that were essentially joint for both, you know, collecting data from the community for the purpose of filling both plans. But this time, there's a lot more community engagement and a lot more collaboration between, both elected and non-elected, participants in both city and county that are able to create a plan that hopefully will become more cohesive and uniformed that way, or identifying the differences that need to happen. That's the difference between that first one and now. Accountability for the plan, there's action items or goals that are identified in the plan, but usually that turns into like things like code amendments and things like that that have to happen afterward. And unfortunately, there are lots of times where certain goals can't be met just based on lack of staff or, you know,
Ryan,
resources.
Ryan, another big change is we now have a fleshed out planning department in the city, which didn't exist before. We have a planning department which is fully fleshed out in the county, much more proactive. So we have two completely different entities that can be held accountable moving forward that really didn't exist in 2015, not in the same way.
No, that's fair. I just was, curious for my own interest if we're spending the time committed to putting this together, if there is some forethought as to what that might look like as it relates to, how we're being held accountable or what is different so that we ensure our time now is leveraged most beneficial for our future selves.
Definitely.
It's a great question.
Yeah, one other thing, I feel like there's been a lot of projects in the last 10 years that have forced the county and the city to work more closely together, like rail yards, like a couple of these potential annexations where I just feel like they've only been successful with collaboration. And then I think another thing is like the city did their strategic plan for the first time ever, Dana, or the first time in a long time, one of the two. And I think a lot of times the city strategic plan, whether it's on a yearly basis or an every 2-year basis, and I don't know what the county commissioners are gonna do, you can say our goal is to implement these 3 items from the comprehensive plan this year, or we need to start saving money for this bigger item that we wanna do in 5 years. I think forcing it to be part of your work program in your departments and your city strategic plan, marrying the two together is one of the only ways you can make the comprehensive plan accountable.
I'd say from a staff perspective, to answer Mr. Hill's question, I think there's more capacity to recognize, appreciate, work with the differences in our built environment. Like those differences are there. So, and maybe use Commissioner Lynn's example of housing and density, for example, if the community says we would like to have, we would like to prioritize housing in more dense locations where there's access to, to transit or infrastructure, et cetera, then there is opportunity for, there's the capacity for the city and county to work together and say, okay, we're gonna implement these policies on the city side so that we can accomplish this overall goal of having housing that's located near services, just as an example. So it's, I said more capacity to work with the differences in our built environment.
Yeah, that capacity is huge.
And I think the other big difference too, that we've been hitting on, but we're getting ready to come out and see if we've got the community values right. And so, we haven't had a community vision or values process guiding this process before. We're really looking for community buy-in and participation, which will then ensure accountability through the decisions that are made. So that's a huge different approach than we ever have before. Before we've gone to consultant who has our statutory obligated topical areas, and we're researching those, we're looking at existing conditions, and to a certain degree it is cookie cutter. And this is completely different. We've never really gotten to know ourselves, really understand what's truly important before we ever even started, coming together for this. So it's just so unique.
I'll just note that that'll be a useful component of the trade-offs discussion, which I think is an important one, and there's too many comprehensive plans out there that you know, you read each chapter and they all sound really good, but when you look at them together, you're like, how are they gonna have like this primary focus on, you know, preserving our small town character? And then they also said like, we wanna bring, I mean, Glenwood did this. We're gonna preserve our small town character, which really sounds nice, and I like that idea. And we wanna bring a bunch more housing and activity downtown, well, all the neighborhoods downtown, we're like, I thought we were preserving our small town character. And then people were trying to pull permits downtown, like, I thought we were bringing housing downtown. So just understanding that those things, there is trade-offs, there's always gonna be. As an example, you know, within the context of housing, you're generally always balancing questions of feasibility and like what's the public investment, affordability, you know, how affordable does it need to be, and what type of place do we want to create? And those are inherently in conflict with one another, because the cooler, nicer you're gonna make it, which we all wanna do, it's gonna cost more. That makes it harder to be affordable, right? So I think just, that's a great idea to bring that out. I don't know exactly how we do it. Both in the process actually would be cool, and also in the product, just so that, and it's not like we're trying to show the conflict, but show that there's tension between these things. And then the values are a nice
Recognizing it.
place to say, let's realize that we're having some disagreement here about two values that happen to, in this case, have some conflict. We want this to be a family-friendly community, and we, you know, whatever the thing is, so.
And we're definitely seeing that more in our hearings too. I mean, there's been an uptick in the last 10 years that hearings have gotten on conditional uses or even on subdivision have gotten so much more contentious. So it really is a time that we need to be looking at our land use, you know, and understanding who we are and making sure that our policies and regulations align with what, because it is, they're definitely, you know, you'll be experiencing it at the city too. I know we're experiencing it at the county that conversations around entitlements have gotten a lot more contentious. So
Yes.
I think that's an
I don't want to make any assumptions on this, but I guess for my own sanity, and since this is being recorded, is part of this when we talk about what the plan should do for us. Is there a level or to some extent, a defined level of accountability? Because, you know, just coming into this, a lot of this stuff really sounds nice, but if there is a defined level of accountability as to who owns what, I guess my thing that I think about is the execution on this stuff rather than it getting lost between city, county, or somebody pointing fingers at someone.
Yeah, and generally when we have, we call it an action plan, but you guys can call it whatever you want in this thing. But it does get really clear on the resources and the roles. And it needs to have a lead, but then there's often, you can specify what the team is. It's pretty common, but it's really important, we've found that if there's something that you're saying is a priority, but you're not clear who's the lead, we aren't done yet, or it's maybe not a priority. And so I think to your point, Ryan, there's places to do that. And then the other thing you can do, and I think we can just get creative after this point in breaking some of these ideas down. If we synthesize some of these down to a finer number of points, and one of them is how do we stay accountable to this and keep on track and monitor progress along the way so that we can adapt, so that we can, you know, be accountable, so we can communicate with the community effectively. There's tools we can think about, right, that we can design into this and or that can be side components. We've done a dashboard once after a plan where the community had like an online thing where they could track stuff. You gotta decide if you actually wanna keep something like that up. Just saying like, that was a solution to a similar set of questions. Slightly different, but yeah, getting at some of the same things. I know we don't have as much of your guys' time as we'd like to have, so why don't we, unless there's anything else here, why don't we shift to the next part of this, which I think, Brooke, I've been taking some notes, I kinda might have messed up some of the structure here, but maybe if we go to, well, we wanna talk about locations too, and just, we got a little bit of that, but we'd like to know, as you guys think about, I can just create an extra slide, sorry Brooke, I probably messed it up when I was taking notes.
You're all good.
Oh, up at 8, there we go, we can go up there. areas, yeah, I'll just erase this other part. So there are areas, you know, and we really mean locationally, that you guys are thinking are gonna be pretty important, that there's some actual focus on it, in the plan.
Well, the last one didn't address the south part of the county, so I think we all recognize we need to include that.
I've often thought Twin Lakes needs to have its own sub-area plan. And that might not be the terminology that you use, but it's.
Great, that's the terminology I would use. Perfect. Now, one thing we'll have to look at for you guys, and this is super common, depending on the scale of certain things, like you can get to a level of, like often, out of a comprehensive plan that's this scale, is like a follow-up item is we need to do a sub-area plan. But if you could provide some high-level vision for some of what that might be, it's gonna be place to place, so that's the thing. You guys are gonna wanna, that's why we wanna start this conversation about areas we wanna focus in on. And then we can work with, you know, the team to figure out like, okay, well, what fits in terms of actually doing some work in this plan where we're trying to get some detail. Cause one way to think about this is if you were doing just a pure municipal plan, you probably would, you got neighborhoods and districts, not everywhere necessarily, but you got a pretty clear sense of like, there'll be something for the downtown, something for this area, right? The fact that we're doing an integrated plan we shouldn't then say, oh, well, shoot, we have to get rid of the ability to kind of look at specific areas. But because we're doing an integrated one, we also have to look at how deep we can go. So hopefully that makes sense. So one area that sounds like South County, Twin Lakes.
Yeah, it is just an area that we've had the most building permits, so we're really seeing a lot of growth for the county in the southern part of the county. Gateways, as
Yeah.
you are definitely an area
Yeah, our
of
3 mile
concern
area and our
for
gateways,
us.
our transition areas. Because all of our critical resources are in one very small place, those approach areas are very quickly fleshing out.
I also think our manufactured home communities in the county.
Yeah, access
And
to
the city
schools,
too,
access
the
to
city too, our manufactured
water and
home communities
sanitation.
throughout.
I have a hard time excluding anything.
I know.
I'm like, isn't it just all of it?
And it is, I mean, there's nothing that there's not gonna be like big black holes, but it is kind of curious, if there's places, one way that we sometimes think about this is what are the places that are fairly well established? They're gonna change a little bit, but probably not like a lot. And what are the places that are undergoing transition and you kind of look at it and you're like, that's gonna look different in 10 years. Because the places like that, you know,
Yeah,
you
I
probably
think kind of
won't-
like the west side
Yeah.
west side of the city, I'll be more specific with all the potential changes with the school consolidations and rec center, no rec center, like there's just a lot of that's envisioned for the west side around community, and that's like already a fairly busy zone, important kind of through corridor, but that could become a fundamentally different place.
Well, even the
10
land,
years.
the county land,
The county land and the city
yeah,
land,
yeah,
both
all
right
of that
there.
area is where I see
And
the
all
most.
those new subdivisions happening on
growth.
County Road
Yeah.
4, there's like, the west side is a lot going on.
And eventually that could be a boulevard, yeah, I just think
Yeah.
like,
North side too.
yeah.
We've got big parcels of land on the north 2491 corridor
Some
and
big developments
everything.
come out.
I think that's what I mean, like, it's so hard for me to say
I
like,
know.
I'd say
cause it's so small and so, yeah.
generally the city-county interface, but maybe even more importantly, like the extents of where the infrastructure ends and the sanitation districts, service area limits, the water
Yeah.
district service area limits. Those are the area that just they consume so much staff time, I think, both for the city and the county, cause the property owners are trying to figure out, well, should I develop in the city or should I develop in the county? Should I go to the city? Well, the city doesn't know what they want if they're gonna do an annexation, and then these conversations just get really frustrating, really contentious, and so I think, clear guidance on what we want in the city-county interface, but even maybe a different way to look at that is like the extension of our grids, or like what's happening at the end of our grids in terms of all infrastructure, streets,
It'd be nice to
water-
see
water
what's
services.
possible for
Right, I feel like
expansion.
that's always buried in these like old maps and it's not really clear when we're looking at something of like, oh, do they have sewer access? Like, oh, let's go to this old CAD file from like 10 years ago.
Sure, well, and really clear guidance about what potential expansion could be, talking pretty specifically about sanitation, of course. But that would sure be nice to see as future talking points. Where is it possible that we can expand? Where is it completely unlikely that we will ever expand? Those would be very important guiding points.
And then where do we not want to?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think that's a big one, you know, identifying areas that we're keep for more.
And we can look at places where they say,
Conservation.
well, you could, but we don't want to, and we run into that several times too. So having those areas clearly identified
Yeah.
would be a huge goal.
Dark cloud on the horizon, that is the uncertainty around climax and wanna court new industry. I think the airport is kind of a big one that
That's a big one.
I all agree on. Like to see a lot of
Should already
change
be
up there.
done.
Which is one of those places where we're having a little hard time getting any promises of expansion. So yeah, that would be nice to see.
And it's not a location, so maybe I should say it for another time, but it is gonna have a huge impact, and that is the county's water augmentation plan and the marketing of that this year. We're gonna start this year, but that's really big. It's gonna have a big impact on future land uses in the county.
The land conservation, you were talking about land earlier, like these areas that we really, I mean, the river corridor that, you know, the Arkansas. Like I feel like we're the stewards of the Arkansas River, and do we want that valley full of houses someday or not?
And we have a lot of wetlands.
And how do we prevent that from happening?
I
So,
think a lot, higher level, like a lot of this can be kind of discussing like a duality, like, you know, when we're talking about things, where do we want things and where do we not want things, and there's a relationship there, right? Like if we're talking about we want housing density in the core and we're doing things to clarify the backcountry zoning or just reduce density in the backcountry, like those things are working together. So just recognizing that.
I'm so jealous of you guys. You know, where we are, there's a lot of effort that goes into that same conversation, but it's never coordinated across the jurisdiction, so it never happens.
That coordination happens here.
And one more thing that complicates things for us is we've got this monster National Historic District just right dead in the middle of everything that we have, everything has to be able to coordinate with that. So that's where these potential transition places can help speak to how do the north and south corridors and these growth patterns butt up against our National Historic District.
This is great, and we'll get more into this. The next stage, and we'll be doing some of this soon, is, you know, we'll be getting into some mapping and develop some framework maps and asset mapping and all that stuff. It'll be fun, it's gonna be a great part of the engagement. But out of that, we'll gain even more clarity, but it's nice to go into that with some understanding of things, especially things that the general public may not go to right away when we're doing some of that engagement. I thought the service area kind of mapping and discussion is really particularly interesting, given what you guys are talking about, the need for coordination and some of the unique dynamics of how your services are provisioned and so on, whatnot, so.
We also have a unique constraint in that there's historical contamination that limits what you can do in some areas.
well, the mining district isn't on there, but maybe historic district, mining district, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the mining district should be on there as well.
It's got a lot of pressure on it.
Mhm.
So I know we're short on time, even though we'd like to hang out with you guys longer, so let's go to slide 10, Brooke. And just take a few minutes here to talk about, in light of everything we just covered, just let's try to begin thinking about structurally, what are some of the things we would want to begin thinking about for how the plan should be structured. You know, it's almost like thinking about it is, you know, how are we gonna have to design this well? I'll give you an example that you guys already brought up. The idea of, two of them came up. The collaboration and coordination needs to be a through line. It's not like, maybe it is a chapter, but it is also, when you guys are talking about, it's a component of every section. This is how that needs to happen. Another one is sort of someplace, it's a really understanding the trade-offs. That may or may not be a through line, we don't know, but that's like a structural thing that way. So now, other things you guys can think about, and Brooke has some pieces put together here. Brooke, do you wanna speak to any of these?
Yeah, I can quickly go over. And these are just general ideas for structuring, right? Coordinated but parallel plans. That's essentially what y'all already have. Two plans that came out that were separately adopted that are different plans came out of the same process. I will take a stab and say that's probably not something we're interested in doing again this time. But there are other ways we can do it too. So it could be one plan that is adopted by both jurisdictions. And all chapters are essentially adopted by the county and city. So that would be, our vision, a shared land use framework that sets out, these land use principles that we all agree to, even though there will be two separate land use plans. But then like your housing policy, if that's part of it, or your economic development policy will be used by both governing bodies. Hybrid is kind of a combination of the two, where both jurisdictions are adopting like foundational content, like our vision, shared land use framework or land use principles, our goals. And then we have chapters that we can set out that's like, this is a housing policy chapter that's specifically for the city and one that's specifically for the county. Same with capital improvements, etc. So there's a lot of different ways that we can structure it. So it's helpful to think through, like, are there policy areas? Are there physical areas where we would benefit from having one shared framework that we're using? Or are there areas where, it needs to be tailored?
And please know, entering you guys into this conversation now, we're not gonna make a decision tonight, but if we start thinking about these things now, it can help us in terms of, a number of different things. One, it'll even help on the process side, but two, it'll just start getting us all on clear vision for sort of ultimately what we're trying to create.
Do you have a framework that you've used that ultimately helps us narrow down what's best for us?
We recently did a unified, how would you describe the Gunnison roadmap, Brooke?
Yeah, so the Gunnison roadmap was a regional plan. I would say the land use section is most similar in my mind to like a shared land use framework that had land use principles that were adopted or recognized by each jurisdiction as, yes, these are how we filter or make land use decisions because we're all subscribing to this set of principles. The housing section, which was the one that I most closely worked on, was housing policy and frameworks for collaboration that were applied across all of the jurisdictions that participated in that plan. The goal of that really being, how do we align ourselves and our processes on shared housing policy moving forward?
So it was all, in the end, it was all one plan, but again, I don't think there were any, so it's a good question, Ryan. I mean, I think we don't have I think our take on it is the more integrated you guys can have in an actual way, the better, but we also recognize, and that's part of why we wanna ask this question, that there might be just to the point of it being digestible, there might be components where you wanna have like a section that's like, this is pretty much about the city, this is pretty much about the county. Because you can see how in trying to combine everything, there will be points where we're like, this is just harder than it needs to be. We will find that out more as we go, but it's important to get a sense of what's important to us is like, how integrated and structurally do we want this to be?
Yeah, the hybrid plan sounds like it makes the most sense to me, just because if we're sharing the foundational pieces in the vision, in a lot of chapters are just gonna be aligned and shared, but then there are the ways that we can identify, hey, this is gonna be different for the city than it is for the county, and that's
Just
like density,
zoning
that's
density,
zoning,
yeah.
that's like, it's industrial, there's just so many pieces of those kinds of things that I can see you'd want, you know, like historic, like some of those pieces that I think you'd want to have, that won't be applicable to the county, but will be for the city, or vice versa, and so having one plan, but then having those, I guess what I feel like you're saying in those modular chapters is these chapters that are more, this is city, this is county, and just very clear so that there's not a whole lot of overlap there of like, well, but you said, you know.
Yeah.
So I feel like then it helps us identify too, like, hey, we want more of that here,
Right.
take it off of you, you know, whatever, and you're able to kind of identify that, but then in the same plan.
Really nimble resource, you know, something that you
Yeah.
can really, you can, but then you can pull something and you can pull that uniform, and those commonalities, common themes throughout it into a staff report as staff
Right.
that you could, so I just like that it's, you know, kind of nimble, I like that it's got kind
Seems
of
like
the
a-
best of both.
Like a framework would be to go through and just ask ourselves on each of these individual elements, is there something within here that within the city or the county that has the potential to affect the other jurisdiction, like in an unintended way or something?
Right.
And if the answer is yes, then that should probably be a joint effort.
Correct.
If the answer is no, there's no way, then it's probably okay to separate those things. But for example, I use Commissioner Edwards' example of historic preservation. If the city is super heavy on historic preservation regulation, that could encourage development in the county in an unintended way. So that may be one where we say, yes, that is something that both the city and county should consider in terms of where we're encouraging or not encouraging development. So just, I think that might be a framework for going through and deciding which of these elements we want to join forces or keep separate.
Which even that point made feels very like the core interest there is that alignment of being clear, like we don't want an unintended consequence to be, which again, I think speaks to the idea that fundamentally we want shared vision, shared strategies, you know, both in terms of land use, and, you know, policy for all these things, you know, and then also in terms of some of the thinking around capital investment and things like that. So if those things are all, here's the strategy, but then in the action plan, we can be clear, like this is this role, this is this role. And then in areas that are more policy oriented and less sort of investment or programmatic, we might be able to have sort of a modular structure that's like, this is specific to the city, this is specific to the county.
Well, and
So-
just like with your signage policy that we've been working on, you know, the signage for the county is outside of the National Historic District, but we were very careful to be conscientious of the style and form of that to fit in with and be complementary to the historic nature of our community. So we're already collaborating on that point, so you're right, having those talking points be held accountable both city and county-wide, so it's a collaborative effort would be very important, and it's something that we're already doing.
You don't have a Twin Lakes.
Awesome, well, I know we had an hour and we've already used it, so.
Oh, I thought we had a schedule for two.
Oh, do we have more time?
Do you have other things on your agenda? You said an hour.
To be fair, I told the city P and Z to be here until 7.
Yeah, I remembered,
cool.
oh, okay, okay.
But-
I remember you said that, but then Cece said later, no,
I
it's
was
just
like
an hour,
rushing through it, I was
so
getting
we
so
were like,
worried.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought I don't know.
Do you have other items on your agenda?
We don't have any other items on the
Oh,
agenda,
okay.
so it's
Oh,
really
Well,
just
then I
we
don't have
can,
to feel like I'm gonna shut down the conversation. That's good, and we will probably get you guys out a little bit early, cause in our push, we got through a lot of it. So that's actually great. Thinking then about, sort of not just the structure, but wanna go back to the question of, and we got at this a little bit in some of the first comments around what we want the plan to do for us, is a question about sort of the, almost the look and feel of it. We got digestible, right? What else when you guys think about what would be really helpful for you to have? And again, this is just, the sooner our team can get clear on like, this is the type of thing they wanna get to, the easier it'll be for us to design along the way to get there, so that's why these might feel like questions you just wait until the end for. We'd love to have a sense of what you guys want. I'm sure it's gonna be digestible, clear, things like that. But other ideas in terms of plans you've looked at that you really liked, I mean, you guys should consider, do we want this to be 100%, like a classic PDF? That's the main thing. There's many jurisdictions that are now going to an entirely web-based comp plan. I have no suggestions either way, but questions like that in terms of how you want people to experience the plan.
I would say this, and I think it's important that clarity be number one on your list of desired outcomes. And to do that, I think of that in terms of not so much verbiage, more graphs and charts. Because those tell a story very clearly to the public without them having to digest pages and pages.
Yeah, I think the graphs and charts and the aesthetics of some of the plans were so much better. They picked the only cloudy day in Lake County to take all of the pictures of the comp plan, I swear. I don't know if you remember that, Heather or Greg, we were like waiting for pictures and so excited about it, but then they came out and we're like,
Those are terrible.
they're the worst pictures we've ever seen, and then the maps, of course, were not. So we absolutely, better graphics, better photos, better aesthetics, better word, to make it more digestible,
But even that, like, and I know you
so much
said
better.
clear and clarity, but, and I'm just gonna regurgitate it all over again, just because I think that, one of my favorite things is how many rainbows and unicorns are floating around, and like, it's really easy to make a sentence say, we really want it to be super affordable for everybody to live here and work here and be happily ever after, and like, there's no like clarity to that. Like, there's no like, what
what does that
actually is that and what does it mean? And so I think that although it's pretty words that sometimes get put in these, like, it's not helpful.
I think a better way to say it is much less ambiguity to the words or the terms.
Yeah.
Clarity means one thing, but be direct.
I have a question. We sit here more or less in a vacuum thinking of what this should look like and what it should be because it makes sense to us. But you guys are the experts and have done this with other counties. I guess from a starting point, the way that I kind of think about it is, what are the things that you have seen that maybe we should consider avoiding?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, what are there things that maybe we want to avoid it becoming? Which is, I love that question. Sometimes we do what we call a pre-mortem, which is like, let's talk about what could go wrong at the beginning. That's nice to think about. We can share some thoughts, but then I think, a lot of you guys probably have, in your time, seen some other plans and stuff, so you can talk about what we don't want. I think one of the things we already got to, which is the kind of the siloized nature of the way these things can happen. A lot of times you end up with plans that are put together by people that are sort of specializing in a chapter, and their job is basically to provide the chapter. And then there's somebody whose job is to try to, make it all flow together, but it's not always necessarily, the through lines of intention aren't always there. And so I think, and it's harder to actually make it so that each section really connects to and flows into the other while also getting at the substance of what that section is supposed to be about. It's easier just to be like, this is a whole thing about housing, and then we'll talk about economic development over the next one. But trying to make it so that the sections are really talking to each other in the same sense that there's sort of the through line of collaboration, just that there's no internal inconsistencies. I think that has to do with the flowery language too. It's just trying to get at the level of clarity of what your community, what really matters. So I think that's one of the things we see that can be killer on these things, for sure.
How about avoiding a whole pile of appendices at the back end where you're constantly having to go back and forth? And do you have a page count in mind, like 100, 150?
To you guys.
Well, we've looked at examples
Yeah.
from like Pueblo County that was just,
I can't remember, it was 400 pages or something, excessive, and that was just a thought.
Say failure's too long, if it's too long,
Yeah,
We're
I was
not
just
gonna-
gonna
Yeah,
mention
yeah.
that the project management team, we can share with both commissions and board the examples that we looked at, because I think that this would be a really good time if you had all seen or had an opportunity to look at some examples from some other plans in Colorado and communities, so, cause there's some great examples out there. There's some that, you know, I immediately, I can't, of course, right now, without all my notes, I can't tell you which ones I really liked, but I know we all on the project management team, there were ones that really stood out to us, and there were ones that we thought in common were exceptional over other ones.
I think like 100 pages feels really good. There's examples out there of 400 pages that feel really, really tough. I think the other thing to think about is like, people are changing, society's changing, our attention spans are reducing. Everything is becoming more like short-lived in terms of driving engagement on phones and things like that. So the questions we ask ourselves is like, okay, elected officials, appointed officials, they are definitely using this document in a very different way than members of the public may be using it. And if we are trying to create a plan that the members of the public can stay engaged with, I think that's just the question is how do we keep members of the public engaged with this over the next 5+ years, 10
Right.
years.
But still has the detail you needed on it.
Right, I know,
Sure, that's my problem, it's like, that's more important.
I think there could be creative opportunities where you
Right.
say the same thing in two different ways, in two different places.
Maybe you need more than one report, by that I mean
A
an
summary,
executive summary report, if that's
yeah,
an
that's
incorrect
like
term,
10 pages.
but that's 10 pages for the public. You can also refer them to the full 100-page document,
right,
but yeah.
I think that web-based, the interactive, the piece where you can go in and find what you're looking for very quickly electronically, sure has a lot more there.
At the same time, we have so many people that are low tech and they just wanna
oh my
like print
gosh,
out
so
their
many just
plan,
want a
they
PDF
just
copy of something they can write
go to
notes on,
the
so we'd need a
meeting.
hybrid of that too, we want it all,
I know.
we could do all of
Yeah.
them.
One thing I think would be nice that I feel like is helpful, just because these end up being kind of living history documents through various staff changes and elected official changes, is showing how the values are integrating into the goals and policies, so like whether that's, I've done that a lot through icons, you have like a green icon for like connection to nature or whatever,
Yeah,
and it
that's
says like, these 3 goals are connected to this value, and or taking like quotations or a chart from a survey and saying like 75% of people said that affordable housing was their top issue, and like you're showing that directly from the engagement and saying, okay, therefore we have this housing goal that's directly related to what we heard in the engagement, so like just making sure the values in the engagement and then what we're actually doing with that is like,
Yeah, it's
we're showing that
it's like the
pathway,
engagement version of showing your math.
showing your map. Of like, people will be like, oh, where did that goal come from? Where did that acronym come from? You're like, well, buried in appendix H, we have this engagement summary that says blah, 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 blah.
Right, right.
And I think there's some cool graphical ways to do that.
That's where the charts and graphs would really come in handy
Yeah.
and make it
Well, I
easier
like the
for people to
icons too for
understand
goals.
and eliminate a lot of verbiage.
Yeah.
And we're already doing that in a lot of places, a lot of our new policies, city and county both, are going to graphics-based explanations, and it really does help. It makes it much harder for somebody to play the system against you.
Yeah, graphic space is good. I would also say, and I'm speaking because this is how I learned, bullet points.
Yeah, I know.
Give me bullet points.
I'd like to know just what are some of like, this is we have a lot of momentum going here with a very creative project, very creative engagement. And so I'd like to know like, what are some of the, kind of along those same veins, what are some of the most creative ways that people have found for this document to like live with the community through the intended period, the decade plus? Is that, is it a sign of the future land use map in front of City Hall and the county or something? Perhaps there are creative opportunities that are outside of just a PDF on the website or a website.
I mean, there's a couple things that we have found really helpful that I can share. One is towards the end of our process, we have this thing we call stewardship, which is the idea of how do we keep this thing off the shelf essentially? How do we keep working together? How do we keep the vision alive? And that ends up being its own sort of strategic discussion that we'll have with you guys. And it's sort of like the thing's done, right? And so it's a post-strategy, right? And you've got the actual plan, and now it's like, all right, how are we gonna actually keep this going? And it's inside of that we can start talking about things like, do we need or want an online, I used an example I used earlier, like an online dashboard that could just track our implementation against some of these things, or some big projects, or something like that. Is there and then similarly, we've talked a lot about collaboration today. If you all decide, and it sounds like you are going to, and already have we're already committed to this, but it's just figuring out how it's gonna work, to create systems and structure for long-term collaboration around how to implement this and ideally other things, you're gonna need kind of a game plan for that. Because one of the things that's gonna happen is everything's gonna be cool, we're having like all the momentum, we got this thing done, and then all of a sudden we're gonna be like, wow, this has been really fun, we're gonna leave. And we're not that important, but we are this capacity that all of a sudden one day is gonna be gone. And so helping you guys think about that is like, oh, okay, well, how do we keep collaborating? How do we keep that structure? And that's actually something that I think we've got some really interesting lessons from maybe some other places that at some point we could even bring in here. Sort of say like, what's worked and what hasn't? And the most instructive is what hasn't. Like, where have they run into problems? Some of it's around leadership change, some of it's just whose job is it to actually like make sure we've got an agenda and know what we're talking about when we have our, quarterly meeting or whatever. Because that falls on some person, and that person eventually gets worn out of being the person who's, stewarding all this stuff. So anyway, there's a lot to unpack there, but we can and will help you guys think about those components at the end. The web side of it, I think these days, we kind of need multiple types of communication. So thinking about how you sustain a web presence, one of the things that I've seen so many times, it's just a killer, is projects invest in a website for the process, and then it goes away. And people are legitimately, and the reason is because nobody wants to pay the annual hosting fee or whatever to serve whoever, I don't know technology, but whatever you're supposed to do every year, they don't wanna pay it anymore. And I get that, but man, so many people then come emailing us from some community and, Laramie, Wyoming, like, what happened to that website? We worked with you guys, and I'm like, yeah, we don't have it anymore. And they can't, and there's things that are lost. So you guys will wanna think about those kinds of ideas. And then the other thing that is really important is the engagement. Hopefully what we've learned together in this process is stuff that you guys apply over the long haul, and the engagement doesn't stop or go away. And I think especially if you can create, we all love like celebrations and birthdays. If you guys can create an annual thing where you come together and it's a sort of a, whatever you wanna call it, state of the community or some type of event where you're checking in on progress, you're setting up some engagement and dialogue around what is and isn't working, how do we pivot. Those can be super interesting and engaging, and people love it. It also it applies some pressure to you guys as staff, like, we gotta get our shit together and be ready for that, So those are just a sampling of some things that we've seen that can really help, and we can help you guys think about, get there. And you guys probably have examples too of other things you guys have.
But correct me if I'm wrong, that sounds like things drop by the wayside. You gave the example as like the website hosting is because there potentially wasn't a way to monitor that success of the value back to either the community and or, us paying for it at the city or county level. So from an ability to actually measure it, it sounds like that wasn't thought through.
Yeah, that's probably right. I think that's right. I think it's, the other thing that happens at the end of things, whenever we do a little bit of a sprint or a long run, this might be a long run, but with some sprints along the way, people finish and you get a little tired and you're like, I'm gonna eat a donut, and have a beer. And it's gonna be a little bit like that too. You're like, we don't need a website anymore. We did it. We were so successful. And so you can kind of let things go. And the ironic thing, Ryan, is that they, at the same time that one of our projects that had a really cool website got rid of the website, but then they started a new one internal to one of the jurisdictions to do this, what do we call it? The impact dashboard. so that they could track things. And it just would have been cool if they actually kept the project website too alive and, so these are, there's probably reasons, but I think your point is a good one. You know, it's gotta be clear sort of what the accountability is and how we're gonna monitor our progress and think about those systems.
Great, well, just send us an invoice for what it'll be to keep the website up.
Yeah.
I was thinking the community builders hanging out up here with this problem.
Maybe November.
Well, yeah, we're, for what it's worth, we're trying to think about our relationship with partners too, especially on these big projects, because we've gotten feedback, we do all this work together and then all of a sudden one day you guys, it's like Mary Poppins and you just go away. And are there ways we can kind of keep collaborating, in a different way, but, so we're looking at that too. Awesome. So coming back to some of these questions around the structure, I feel like we've covered this probably as well as we can at the moment. But is there anything else people wanna fold in terms of sort of the content or structure of what the final document or tool needs to be for you guys? It's gonna be clear, it's gonna have really good graphics, we're not gonna use a bunch of flowery language, it's gonna have to be direct and not have language that leaves a lot of ambiguity. It's gonna have to have structure that makes it so there's clarity around sort of the shared alignment of vision and strategy, while also acknowledging that there will be some places where there's unique dynamics to each jurisdiction that probably need to have their own space. We need to make sure it has built-in sort of tools or systems for making so it can track and monitor progress. Yeah.
I think we've already said it with that accessibility, public accessibility, so if it's web-based or whatever, so just make sure that we've got good overall accessibility to it.
I know in the new law, they're implement all of these have to be accessible.
One of the things that'll be, not to make our job too hard, Brooke's gonna call me right as I'm heading out, like, what in the world? It's so hard, but, cause this might fly in the face of some of the other things you guys were just talking about, but, a lot of the social science research right now that's trying to get it, a lot of it's focused around why we're so divided. And one of the things that we're learning is, our ability to sort of connect ourselves to shared stories is a really important part of being aligned and unified. And so thinking about how it's somewhat structure, somewhat just thinking about how this can provide you guys with a story in a way of where you're trying to get to that can help, unify the community would be great.
One thing you could do along those lines for each category is almost at the very beginning of the category, speak directly to what is aligned between city and county and what is not, and the reasons for that. And I mean, that would add a lot of, it would answer a lot of questions right up front.
Yeah, context explaining, that'd be nice. At least from where we are right now, that would be a nice way to view the plan.
Great. Then I think the other thing we would, if we had time to do it, was just to begin asking you guys to think about, since it sounds like we do, which is awesome. That's funny, I told Brooke, I was like, we're not gonna have time to get into that, cause I thought we only had an hour. Is now to begin thinking actually about how you guys think you would wanna collaborate as we go forward on this. So what does it look like for these two bodies to sort of start moving forward in a way that we're collaborating? What is that, what do you guys need, and what does that look like?
I apologize, I have to go. Thank you guys. Thanks.
Well, I think it would be helpful to understand or like maybe talk through the overarching process of like what's coming up and at what stages, because then it can be a little easier to understand at what stage we need those collaborative sessions.
Yeah. Would that be helpful for us to kind of provide a quick, just reminder of the roadmap? Yeah.
Yep.
Great, if you go to 14, Brooke, I can walk you guys through. So we can do all of this right here. You guys are sort of right in the end of values, entering into vision. And the cool thing you're gonna find is that a lot of what we want for vision work is gonna have emerged, and it's intentional. You know, we ask these questions about what are your hopes and aspirations, what are your fears and concerns for the community, and a lot of the ways that people answer those point towards what they do and don't want for the future of the community, right? So, and then the question of, you know, what do you love most about this place really gets us at what do we wanna sustain? So, we're gonna enter into that with a lot of good content, but we'll also begin taking some of that work and getting more topically focused with it. And Brooke, I can't see you other than like this, there's an owl speaker right there that I can look at and pretend like I'm looking at you. So definitely jump in any point here, but because you're not in the room, I'm gonna do my best to kind of walk through it. If there's anything where you're like, let me, you know, make this point that's more specific to some of where we are and where we're headed, jump in. But anyway, the vision will be, we're gonna need to begin, because values are it's a blank slate, we kind of cover everything. Once we get into vision, there will be overarching vision for sort of the region, so to speak, the whole county and the community, the city together, and also of course the South County. And that vision is gonna cover, you know, multiple topics, of course. But then we'll also start getting into more topical exploration of goals and outcomes and principles. So then from there, we can get into defining strategies and, okay, well, these are the things we want vis-a-vis economic development or, you know, land use and growth or housing. At that point, we'll start getting into the brass tacks of the strategies and actions that we're gonna take. So those might be policy, they might be programmatic, that might be identification of capital projects, things of that nature. And all of that will include and require, you know, a lot of attention towards who's gonna do what, and where the resources are gonna come from. What we keep in this all the way through is a lot of space for learning and seeing what other places have done that's worked really well and what you guys have done that has worked well or hasn't. So that you're really kind of leaning into some of the most innovative things, and it's not like we're just coming along and saying, here's what you should do. Instead, engaging the community in this sort of collaborative problem solving work of saying, you guys say you got a housing problem here, like let's work through that, and here's some things that other communities like you have done, and you all are gonna help find the solutions and actually vet them and talk about the trade-offs between them. So that's a lot of effort, so if you wanna know where sort of the rubber's gonna hit the road in terms of harder work, it's strategies, it's gonna be a lot for you guys, because also that is where the technical components of a comprehensive plan, we need to make sure we're checking all the boxes in terms of all the stuff that really has to get nailed down in there. So that one's gonna be a big one. And then implement is where we'll get into questions of, you know, the stewardship I mentioned and sort of finalizing and solidifying a long-term kind of collaboration structure and approach. And also just thinking about what you can move on first. So those are the kind of components of the process in a big picture way. I would probably encourage you guys to think that to get to a place where you're collaborating well, I mean, first of all, the question is maybe maybe too ambiguous, because I'm asking it in terms of this group. But maybe it's better to think about broader collaboration between the city and county in a more general way, with this group being a critical component of that. I think the question Brooke and I are wanting to get to is what does it actually look like to practice the collaboration we're saying is needed and we wanna get to? You know, what is that gonna look like for you guys, and how do we help you guys get there?
I mean, sorry.
Is that a bunch of smaller groups talking or fewer bigger groups?
It can be many different things, the way, you know, depending on what you guys think is important. Very often, there can end up being a group that's formed, you know, at a point in the process that its focus is how we're gonna work on stuff together, it's the collaboration focus.
Apologies, I'm out of time.
It's all good, thank you. And so you all could certainly, we could get to a point where it makes sense, alright, let's legs under that and start working specifically on that. And that would wanna bring in all the key players, and I think at one point, we talked about that as like throughout the whole thing, and then we decided, let's just get things rolling, cause we had enough teams going, and I think everybody was busy enough. But at some point, you guys might get to a place where we wanna have, some scaled up discussions around what does it mean to collaborate between, obviously, the key, partners in the project, but also maybe some other ones.
Well, yeah,
We've
sorry.
already got a team, right, it's.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, some people aren't in a lot of this, like, so I think just to back up a little bit, like, the visioning process is happening right now, so there's a bunch of data that's now been collected through some of this public engagement piece, and there are groups sifting through that and creating more of that, like, compiled vision type information. So I don't think it's talking about us doing that necessarily, it's more that we're gonna receive that data and then do we collaborate, or do we have some meetings regarding that, so,
And really, the meeting might be just how do we actually work together?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Like, what is the structure?
Yeah, I think part of that is kind of just checking in with the respective commissions and the different elected groups, like I said earlier, this is definitely heavier at the commission level, but ultimately the respective elected official boards adopt this. And so, there's opportunity for the respective commissions to meet like we're doing right now. In July, both elected boards for city and county are meeting. There's an opportunity for us all to meet, as a group, but just checking in that, we're checking in with the electeds who are ultimately adopting this and making sure that it's okay that we're doing the bulk of the work at this level in terms of formalizing the plan.
Other thoughts on how, how we start thinking about the longer term need for collaboration on this? I mean, we've been talking about it a lot and sort of
Yeah.
this high level, like
I
we're
guess
gonna collaborate.
I guess I'm seeing it like play out and get defined more when we're talking about specifics, when we're going through the comprehensive plan and we're talking about this one specific subject, economic development or housing, right? I think that's when we have to kind of define how that collaboration and how those meetings should be structured and who's involved in that collaboration, who are the players at the table, who should be there, and how that gets created. I don't really know how we could create that as an overarching, I would think it's gonna be specific to content or goal focus.
Yeah, and I think this is more, not just speaking specifically to the comprehensive plan, but I think the longevity of working together and implementation is that, we've been talking for a while about having quarterly meetings between our commissions and just, finding that time to bring you all together, coming up in perpetuity that we're continuing that work forward. So when we're in the topical areas of the development of the plan, how does that look? But then I think that we've always been really trying to bring everybody together quarterly.
Is that something that'll be spelled out specifically in the plan? And I'm only thinking about, you guys are great, and I'm not worried about either one of you moving that forward, but should one of you not be in that same leadership position, do we have a way to spell that out specifically in the plan about how that coordination should move forward and continue?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the government, efficiency part, designer
I mean,
goal and
just
strategy.
spelling that out
That
and
kind of gets
making
into
it
the
a,
strategies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like probably a couple steps down the road and.
Do you all do like an annual goal setting, like what you wanna work on the proactive side versus like reacting to applications?
We have in the past.
Okay.
We've had a lot of changes lately.
Yeah, we have a huge
I'm just thinking,
turnover.
like, let's say this plan's done by the end of the year, like how awesome would it be if like in January we had a goal setting session, we said like, okay, the city's gonna focus on implementing these 3 specific things and the county's gonna focus on implementing these 3 specific things,
Yeah, like it's a
but
joint
it's
goal
like,
setting session.
but it's like we're all doing it towards the
Agreed.
same
yeah,
end.
and having that
And then
spelled
through
out.
our like staff reports or like agendas, like we can see like maybe quarterly, it's like, where did you get, or where are your roadblocks, or how far did we get, where are our roadblocks, something like that.
Mhm.
I do think these things, the implementation comes down to the discipline pick a point in time, like
Yeah.
even if it's just
Yeah.
annual, if it got done annual, it'd be remarkable, you know, to set
Sure.
those.
Yeah, because people will change, so having it
Yeah.
spelled out in
Right,
the
like the
process
routine.
is important.
And I think there are two things that really impact both jurisdictions in terms of annual occurrence and budget setting. And when that happens for each jurisdiction, and then, and like goal setting, for example, goal setting, if we're doing that on the calendar year, for example, the city did the strategic plan, adopted it in January, February for the year. So, an annual meeting in the fall, for example, summer or fall could line up with budget setting and goal setting.
So these are great examples of things that you guys do within existing structures. What's so funny and amazing really about humans is we don't always even see like the amount of structure that's already around us, and then when we try to envision another sort of component, we're like, it's really confusing until you realize like how much is already there. And what we don't wanna do is just create a whole lot more to do. But we also know a little bit just sort of about from the science of collaboration about what does and doesn't work. And the things a little bit really, really important, I believe it's like, there's been some analysis on like, where does collaboration break down? And the vast majority of where things break down is just lack of clarity of shared goals, right? So if you get goals right, that is really good. Anybody wanna guess what the second thing is? Time. Goals. Time is a good guess too. Like when is it gonna happen? And then it's actually the interpersonal dynamics and all the things that people think are like the problem, very small if those are well established. The challenge in things that change is we collaborate well when there's a clear like end goal and we're working towards that and then it's done. What's harder is when we're working on these problems that are not gonna go away. You're just gonna manage them over time. And so how do we sort of create that collaborative structure around that? And one of the things that can help is like, you think about the one community idea. It's an idea that can help you guys collaborate. Like if you did nothing else other than keep that idea as something that lasts beyond this plan, it can either be a plan title or it can be sort of a calling card for how you guys work going forward. And if it's the latter, then it includes the former, but it also means there's something behind that, like, okay, well, what is that? How do we do it? And there's probably some space there for everything you guys have just said in terms of how we get aligned on budget setting and goal setting. These are these annual things that already exist. But then potentially also folding in some of the other key players in ways that maybe isn't happening now. Like you mentioned some of the, the service, the metro districts.
Basically,
Service
service districts.
districts, yep.
Yeah.
And I did know that, I can't remember from one day to the next. Folding in some of those other players so that there's a sort of a structure for it. And that's just, everywhere there's not many places that do that. And I think if you talk to some of the folks, I mentioned Gunnison probably too many times today, but if you talk to some of the folks that we worked with there, like the lasting impact of a lot of that work was just that collaborative effort sort of never stopped until just recently. They've had enough sort of turnover and things that they aren't continuing right now the way they had, and they're really worried, they're like, what happened? We're not doing it anymore, but it's been 10 years. So now that, that is probably actually a signal that the plan and strategy is old and they need to like go back and redo the vision. So hopefully this doesn't sound like too much mumbo jumbo. What I'm trying to say is it's probably true that it'll be easier once you're looking at specific issues, but those will still be those sort of like start and stop style of collaboration. You may wanna think about how to create sort of a long-term, ongoing sort of systems and supports for doing this over the long term that aren't overly onerous, so that you're like, oh, we just show up and we have these meetings, but we don't really have to, and you don't want it to be that either. So we'll figure out what that is, but I think that's gonna be something to try to explore, and who needs to be a part of that, and what are its goals, and how are you gonna resource it, and who's gonna like lead it. So cool. Brooke, Brooke, anything else from your end that we didn't get into today? I think the collaboration one makes sense, that is sort of like opening the door to that, but to your guys' point, I think it'll get clearer as we dive into some of these things. But I think in a way, what we're sort of suggesting is maybe on our end, we'll work with the project management team to begin looking for those places where this probably makes sense to start bringing a larger group of kind of those entities that are in the implementation space together, of course, the two jurisdictions, but there's some others, to have a conversation about this. And I think as we do that, we'll start to find that that structure is gonna come in, sort of begin to form a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy we were able to, with this surprise bonus hour, get through our agenda, which was great.
Yep, it's awesome.
A happy bonus hour
Extra
people
time.
here.
Well, we'll take it, it was awesome.
Yeah,
So,
no, we're appreciative of that.
yeah. Anything else that we didn't get to today that you guys were hoping to hear from us, or questions we have? Things are going okay?
I think, I don't know how many people are invited to tomorrow night, but we've done the preview of the visioning work they've done, and it's really extraordinary. I mean, it's really worth, spending a little time and hearing the explanation and the graphics, and it's cool, it's very cool. And it moves us, I was thinking, we'll never even get done this year, and I got done at the end of that, and I went, I think we're gonna be okay.
And is there
I'm with you.
remote link for I can see now. Brooke, there's a remote link for tomorrow night?
Yes, so tomorrow night's meeting will be virtual, so it's with our engagement team, but all are welcome and invited. If you'd like, I can share the link, and you might be able to share it too, and Chapin, you have those to share out, but it'll be from 6 to 7:15 tomorrow night. And we'll go over, what are we essentially setting up or teeing up the conversation of what do we mean by what a value is, and what is the role that plays in planning. We'll walk through the process of how we actually took all of this incredible data that we got and how that turned into values. We'll talk about the engagement reach that we had, and then we'll walk through the values themselves. And are really just trying to get a pulse and a feel for are these resonating? Are we capturing the nuance and flavor? Where are we off? So that way when we share them out, we'll do another set of revisions, and then we'll share them out with the community and the public at large for feedback as we're moving into our next phase visioning.
Yeah, I would just to clarify, Brooke, when you say all can attend, I mean, I just don't want there to be this idea that there's a whole huge public engagement piece at this meeting. Those public engagement meetings are different meetings, so
Right.
I just would love some clarification for that, just so that everybody kind of understands that. I mean, you can come and listen,
Yeah.
but.
Thanks for catching that. Yes. What I mean, all can attend, I mean, the commissioners feel free and welcome to join. It's not, totally open to the public. But if you are a member of the public who's on this call and you would love to participate and add some input now, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to add you. Our engagement team is a group of people and this group has been very much in flux, people joining, people leaving, but it's a group of community volunteers who have been helping and supporting with community engagement, activities and the design and the things that we're doing as part of this project. And so this group is kind of our first pass, through which we like to, ask what kind of activities or what kind of engagement do you think is going to work well here in this place. And so that's really the role of the engagement team. So commissioners, if you would like to join, we'd love to have you. As well as, if you're a member of the public who's really interested and would love to be part of the team, shoot me an email. My name or my address is Brooke, BROOKE, @communitybuilders.org.
And to just add a little piece to that in terms of so these teams, yeah, to your point, they're an established team, and it's got a group of people who are part of it. One of the things we learned along the way of doing this stuff over time is the meetings that always got people really suspicious and wondering what was going on is the one where it was like, you can't come to that. And so we just sort of realized, and we also found so many of those things were sort of a fundamental part of how processes were being done. There's like this steering committee that if you're on it, like you're in there, you know, and it just drives people nuts. And so we sort of have this somewhat of an open door approach, like, if you wanna come, check it out. If you wanna come to like 6 of these, email Brooke and, you know, we'll probably put you to work. But that way, it just takes some of the fear of the unknown out of these meetings, which are, for anybody who wants to stick around for an entire, you know, hour and a half of talking through engagement data, we would love to have you.
Yeah.
Not for everybody.
Yeah, I just like to make it clear that like there's not,
It's not like a public engagement.
it's not
effort.
like, hey, this is when
Yes.
we want to get your feedback from the
yeah,
public,
it's
and
reviewing
so I
data.
don't want, I mean, cause then there's no work gets done really if you,
Yep.
so you've gotta separate those out, so I think public's invited to go and listen or, you know,
Yep.
what have you, but really it's a specific work
It's
session.
a work session.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And there will be lots of opportunities for providing feedback on the values coming up.
Yes, right. Yeah, we're not done with that piece.
Not done. Yeah.
Yeah,
Public side.
Means it's time to go to bed.
yeah, it's time.
Time to go home.
Awesome, well, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you for coming up and thanks for the good conversation.
Literally no place I'd rather drive to at the end of the day, so it's great.
Thank you, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
I love it.
Thanks, Brooke, we hope you get to feeling better.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
yeah, we both do.
Oh, so do we, who's first?
You guys can go first maybe.
First, okay. I will adjourn the City of Leadville Planning and Zoning Commission meeting at 6:52 P.M.
That's way easier than the way I do it. I was always told you had to get a motion to adjourn.
We don't do motions to adjourn, or should we be?
I don't know that we have enough attendees for that.
Moves to adjourn.
Here for a long time waiting.
All in favor? Aye.
Done.
Great,
Awesome,
It's not that much harder.
it's not that,
That's right.
alright.
but then I could just make the decision
You
for
know,
you.
you never have enough people in person at the end of the meeting.
I know.
The chair of our board